Hi everyone and welcome. I think we're live now. This is one of our first attempts at live streaming anything, so we'll see how it goes. But just because we are live streaming, if we can try as much as possible to only have one person talking around the table, then hopefully the microphone will be able to pick us up. I just thought I'd start just by saying a little bit about what we're doing tonight, and then I'll pass over and we can find out who's here. So I'm Sarah. I'm one of Quarantine's artists and producers, and this event that we're having tonight is part of our Tenancy project, which we've created sort of in response to the really rapid and obvious change that's happening in Manchester and Salford at the moment. So sort of the view of all the cranes that you can see out of the window here. And the project's exploring what's driving that change, who has a voice in it, who benefits from it, and who's left out. And so over the course, since October last year until November this year, we're renting this brand new 2-bedroom house on this new development that has been here set up since about December 2017. And we are inviting artists to come and live in this house for periods of time over that year to get to know their neighbours in the neighbourhood, and to create something or leave something behind in response to their stay. And then alongside that, Quarantine are curating a series of events and talks and walks and all sorts of things that explore some of the questions that are coming out of the project, and some of the questions that we feel are important around neighbourliness, which is kind of what the whole project looks at in the context of all this development that's going on. What impact does that have on neighbourliness and how we live together? And at the moment in the house in residence we have Professor Michael Brady from the University of Glasgow, and he's also he's Quarantine's philosopher in residence. So he's worked on lots of quarantine projects, and this week he's been doing a series of philosophical surgeries, so people are able to sign up for a slot with Mike and bring him a philosophical question, and have an hour of Mike's time to talk that through, which I think has been interesting. And while we've got Mike here, we thought it would be interesting to have a philosophical conversation with all of you about, the theme is neighbourliness as a virtue. And the way the event will work this evening is that we have 3 speakers, and I'll let you introduce yourselves because you'll do a much better job of it than I will, who will give us a 15 or 20 minute provocation on neighbourliness, and then we've got a 3-course meal being catered by Cam from the brilliant Samosa Shack. You're in for a treat. So while we eat each course, we'll have space to respond to the discussion. Yeah, is there anything you want to chip in, Richard or Rennie at the other end?
I don't think so, no. Everyone well? Thank you for coming.
I, with a bit of help from these two, will loosely chair the conversation just to keep it moving. So we've got a sort of rough timetable for the evening. So it might be that sometimes we just need to move things on as well. It doesn't mean that it's not interesting where we're at, but we might just need to move it on. So to begin with, it would be nice to sort of get a sense of who's here, who's at the table. And so Cam's going to start serving our starters in a second, I think. And while she does that, I wanted to invite you all to introduce yourselves, and to respond to the question, are you a good neighbour? Yeah, we won't go around in a circle, so people can just sort of chip in as they want to. This with the headphones on, by the way, is Kate, who can't introduce herself. Yeah, and I guess I could start because I've already sort of introduced myself. So I'm Sarah, and I think I'm sometimes a good neighbour. So we've got, the other thing I'll say is maybe just sort of 2 or 3 minutes per person, just because there's a lot of us. But we've recently, in the last couple of years, bought a house in Levenshulme, my partner and I, and we're really blessed to have very nice neighbours and to have been welcomed onto the street. So, like, when we were looking at the house, we were greeted by our neighbour opposite, who came out to tell us a bit about the area, and so we learnt about him and the cats that he has. He's got 6 cats, and a special run for them in his back garden. And we've got very nice neighbours on either side of us, and I think I am quite a good neighbour because I know them and I like to talk to them, but also sometimes they're very chatty, and so I know if I leave the house and I'm on my way to work or something, I'm going to get stopped and I'll be there for 40 minutes. So sometimes in the morning I'll put my key in the door and I'll hear the person next door's door open, and I'll just step back and I'll wait inside the house because I think I'm never going to get to work if I leave now. So I think I'm a sometimes good neighbour. Who wants to go?
Perhaps we start with you. Yeah. So I'm Mike. I've been at Glasgow since 2005, and then at Stirling before that. I'm originally from Stockport. I've known Richard and Rennie for a long time. Richard for nearly 40 years, and Sarah and other quarantine people for a shorter amount of time. And so I work in philosophy of emotion. I'm interested in what emotions are and what they do, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that with respect to neighbourliness in a bit. I don't think I'm a very good neighbour. I think it's not from. I don't think. I lack sort of kindness and compassion, but I don't think that. I think I'm quite nervous and reticent to talk to people in a way. So I think I'd like to be a better neighbour, and it'd be interesting to hear what people have to say about how one might be a better neighbour.
Shall I chip in? So my name's Sheila. I'm originally from Liverpool, which I always start by saying I'm originally from Liverpool because I like that identity, even though I have a love-hate relationship with Liverpool. Anyway, so I'm originally from Liverpool, but I've been involved in development regeneration for decades across this part of the region. I've worked in consultancy, Manchester Council, Salford Council for the last 4 years, but I've just recently left Salford, so I'm about to do more freelance work. So I've been involved kind of at the coalface of development, land, property, everything that you see for many decades. And I've always been really interested in architecture and the built form and buildings, and people often say to me, oh, so you're not interested in people then? And I don't see them as separate things. So the built environment and people go together for me. I love everything to do with construction and buildings, and that's my professional background. But how people use them and live together or don't live together successfully is part of everything that I've been doing for a long time. So it's really pleasurable and interesting to be here. And I don't think I know anybody, which also is really quite nice in a way. So the notion of being good neighbours and and living in cities and being anonymous, as well as people really knowing what you're doing, I think is really interesting as well. I'm quite interested in that. And then the only other thing I'd just say is, because my kind of grounding academically was in geography, being neighbourly, we always talk about who we live next to geographically, whereas you know the communities of interest and people I could think of as neighbours who are not necessarily geographically in the same proximity. So I have different relationships with the people in my street, to the people I work with, to my friends, to people I know in Canada, you know, and it's kind of, I think all of that is neighbourliness in a way, without trying to get out of it, without trying to wriggle out of answering the question. I have been and continue, sometimes good neighbours, sometimes not so good, really recognise that, just not going to talk to them this morning. And I think that's just the nature of how we all live now. Yeah. And also I think during our lifetime, I think it goes through different life stages as well. So being neighbours as kids, being neighbours as adults when you're really busy at work, and then not being so busy at work and going, oh, this is the street I've lived in for 25 years. You know? So anyway, loads to talk about, really looking forward to it.
I should say, do eat something.
Yeah.
Start. The water please.
The jug.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Water.
In the lull, I'll jump in.
You're not having one?
That's all right.
There you go. Up to you.
So my name is Jane, and I've kind of got a Jekyll and Hyde thing going on because I do two things. I work in schools, in primary schools, in Manchester and Stockport, and I also work in arts organisations, including Manchester Camp Arts, which is a local orchestra. And in terms of neighbourliness, on a personal level, I think I'm a very over-the-top neighbour. I like to know everybody who's around, what they're up to, what they're doing, but I can be very useful to other people. For example, my neighbour at the moment is a very old lady who's quite poorly, so I tend to see her a lot because she hasn't got any family, and I literally pop in every couple of days and make sure she's got enough shopping, that kind of thing. On another level, the neighbourliness is very interesting in terms of schools, and schools now trying to get the local community involved in the school. So that's all about who your neighbours are, what they're doing, where they come from. The school in Ancoats is very interesting because it's got children from literally all over the world. So yeah, I'm very interested in it too. That's enough from me. I'm going to eat something now.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I feel like we're going around in a circle, but so I am a neighbour of this area. I live just on the other side of the. I live opposite Andy's church, actually, the Sacred Trinity, and I've lived there for about 2.5 years. I've been in Manchester for about 5. Lived in Salford for 2.5 years.
You've now told them all who I am.
Oh.
You haven't told us your name.
Susan.
I know your name.
And it's actually quite a, with all these tower blocks that are appearing everywhere. I actually live in what looks like quite a small block, but there's nearly 50 people living in there. Oh, sorry, more than. There's sort of 50 flats, even though it's just a little building. And it's amazing how many people I can go out. Every day I go out and I will see different people. I don't necessarily people I've never even seen before. So in terms of being a good neighbour, I think I'm a good neighbour, but I don't even know a tiny percentage of the people living there, and a lot of them are transient. So they're renting and they're not intending to be there for very long. And in terms of neighbourliness in a block of flats, so it's not like Sarah was saying, when you come out your front door and you'll see people in the street. It's, you shut your door, you see people in the lift, you see people in the lobby downstairs. But in terms of neighbourliness, we've got a room that's the bin room, which is where all the rubbish goes and all the recycling. And there's a guy, we have a maintenance guy who comes once a week on a Wednesday. He's lovely. He's from Liverpool.
Oh.
But he's really nice. He's really nice. I always chat to him, and he's got one day he comes in and does all the little bits and pieces that need doing, including emptying out the bins and the recycling. And there are so many people, there's very polite notices everywhere, not angry notices, just informative notices telling you how to do the recycling, what you can put in the rubbish, and if you've got larger objects, this is the number to call or the website to go to. And the number of, every week somebody has been a bad neighbour, and they put, so like today, there are 4 chairs in there that not only are they too big to go in the rubbish, they're perfectly functioning chairs that somebody would be happy to use. So, and I will then, I put a notice up last week saying, who believes in fairies and who do you think is taking these things away? And Alan, who comes on a Wednesday, has to take them, and it says quite, and then he spends his time doing that when he could be doing something more useful. I always sign it Susan, flat 506. I'm not being a kind of a terror. Anyway, so that was a bit of a long-winded thing. So I think I'm quite a nice neighbour. And the people I have met, I chat to, I know a couple of them by name. But there isn't much sharing of cups of sugar and things. That's all.
Okay. I'll go next. My name's Erinma, and I live in Moss Side. I was born in Moss Side, grew up in Moss Side, and travelled about and come back to live in Moss Side. Still living in our family home. I was born in a home, in our home in Moss Side, and our second home that we moved to, we still live there in that home, in Moss Side. And so I do remember the days of, yes, when you used to borrow a cup of sugar and we just used to leave our doors open and you're in and out of everybody's house. And I think because I grew up like that, I think I'm still like that. I would consider myself a good neighbour, even though on our street now, there's probably, I think there's only 2 original neighbours or people, including ourselves and the girls at the top of the road, who bought their house over 40 years ago, and we're still there and we still own the house. And the girls at the top of the road, I actually went to primary school with them, so you know we've known each other for years. I mean, otherwise every other house is rented, you know, by students who, like you say, you know, they change. But I think, you know, our immediate neighbours, because we live in, it's not a duplex, it's kind of like 4, you know, houses together, and we share a private alleyway. But I get on with the students. I introduce myself to them. Have to let them know which day the bins go out, because otherwise, and which they wouldn't really know, you know, because you know when you just move into an area you don't know. And we have another neighbour round the corner who's been there for ages, and she tends to come and put their bins out, you know, and we keep saying to them, the more you keep doing it, they're never going to do it. They don't see the fairy, you know, and takes the bins in and out. But otherwise, I think most of the time the students are nice, you know, you introduce yourself to them, we let them know, and we let them know we've been there a long time, and the people, the actual landlord who owns our house next door actually originally bought that house from my mum and dad. So he usually always lets his students know that, look, Mr. and Mrs. Bell have been here a very long time, you know, so don't do anything to upset them. And so we have that relationship, you know, anyway. And I think, you know, 2 years ago we did a festival in our house and we invited all our neighbours anyway, you know, so yeah, I would say I'm a neighbourly person. I am interested in my neighbourhood. I am concerned about what happens in my neighbourhood. I do know, you know, the people that I need to know in my neighbourhood, I do know, and some of them, especially around the corner, the older folk, you know, who've been around maybe for the past 30, 40 years as well, do know me, because, you know, they often say, oh, I think you've grown. I've been 40. You know, but you still get them to say, gosh, haven't you grown? I say, yes. I met one yesterday. I was with one of my grandsons, and she went, is this your child? Have you had another child? I said, no, I'm a grandchildren now. I'm a grandchild. So, you know, we had a nice chat, because she's been around for years. I've known her for years. But yeah, I would say I'm a neighbourly person. You know, I get involved in my neighbourhood with things that happen and with the people. Even when the neighbours change, the students, we still get to know them, who they are, and get to know what good they're up to and what not so good stuff to get up to. You know. Yeah. That's me.
Just to confuse you, I'm Erinma as well. my namesake. I grew up in East London actually. I think my mum made me a good neighbour. I realised in being an adult and not having kids that basically my mum, I love it that we're doing this thing of inviting people around to dinner. My mum, she's from Denmark, she lived in East End London, and she would invite so many people to our house. Our house was just full of life and people and artists. I'm a scientist, so this was kind of unusual to me. So yeah, I think my mum taught me what it is to be a good neighbour. I have to say I've adopted some of those things, like free wine. She would always do that. She always have some gin or something in the back of her car for when we broke down. So she taught me these things, and part of it is like giving and sharing, all those things. I don't think I do the whole dinner party thing, but one of the things I think that it makes me an accidental good neighbour is we've got an apple tree that we've grown outside our house. And one of our older neighbours who lives around the corner, one day she was picking one of those apples and it got us chatting. So accidentally I've been a good neighbour by growing a tree, and I think probably that's been good for the birds. Our cats, you know, the birds might think the cats would not agree with that, but the cats have got bells on them, so hopefully they're warning that they're coming. So I think there's a way to think about the neighbourliness in terms of not just the people, but also the trees and other plants and species that are around that kind of make a neighbourhood lively, if you like. So I'm not as good a neighbour as my mother, or as nosy neighbour as my mother. I would say I'm an accidental neighbour.
Oh, we are going around in this.
You can put one. We may as well.
That's fine. You can go first.
I can do, right. I'm Andy. As Susan's already revealed, I am the rector of Sacred Trinity Church. I've been reading a really interesting book recently on the parish, and for Anglicans like me, parish is very important actually. That sense of place and a responsibility for a place, and we're in my parish here, you know. And that, so I have a. I don't think a sort of a. What's the word I'm looking for? I don't feel like that's an empiricist thing. It's not that it's my empire or anything, but I feel a responsibility. And I think my church feels a responsibility. And I think that's part of our sort of neighbourliness thing. So I've actually been at Sacred Trinity now for 15 years. But initially I had two churches, St Philip's and Sacred Trinity, and about 3 years ago I carelessly lost St Philip's. And St Philip's now has a new, somebody else there. And at the time I lived next to St Philip's, so the new guy at St Philip's now lives in the house that I used to live in. There was a bit of a period of tension where we needed two vicarages. We had one, and I was kind of going, I'm happy with this new deal, but I don't really want to share a house with you. So if I was just saying to Lucy that if this development had been a bit more in advance, I might have lived here maybe. But we had to find a house, and you try and find it. And the technical thing about a vicarage, because a vicarage is supposed to be a place of hospitality as well, actually. And it should be a home that can fit a family in. So the rules are it should be a 4-bedroomed house with a separate office. Try and find that in the city centre. Boy, is it hard. And we looked at quite a few properties. I did point out that Pep Guardiola lives in my parish, and one of those £2.5 million penthouse apartments in City Suites would do nicely, thanks. I'm sure we can make it do. And the diocese weren't terribly keen on that idea. And just when we were in sort of deep crisis of where I was going to live, a new development came available in Ancoats. And they are kind of ideal, well, almost ideal as vicarages. And so me and the rector of St Anne's, Manchester, both live on the same row now. And the only downside is the living space is upstairs. We were discussing that before, which is great, but a bit of a problem when one of your congregation is in a wheelchair, and you don't. But anyway, we're getting around that. We find ways. So it was quite interesting for me to be rector of Sacred Trinity in Salford and living in the wrong city. It's a 20-minute walk away, but it is the wrong city. And that's quite interesting. And moving into a new development with new neighbours, because we still go out with our old neighbours from Lincoln Place. We both moved. We still go out, and so I feel like I was good neighbours to them. We're good mates now. I don't feel that with the new, where I am now. But I do know some of the neighbours. The bins is an interesting thing. We all several of us refer to the bins. When I first moved in, Manchester Council are rubbish. They do make Salford look really good. But the website was wrong about which day our bins should be collected. So I went to the extent of printing out the correct information, copying it 14 times for my neighbours and putting it through the doors of everybody so that they know which day to put their bins out, because it was really confusing. So those sorts of things, I think, are important. It's about oiling the wheels, isn't it? Or is that the right phrase? Or it's about things running smoothly and helping each other too. make things run smoothly. Some of my neighbours I get on fine with. I think I'm a reasonably good neighbour, but not as good as I'd like to be. I'd like to sort of have a bit more interaction with my neighbours, really. But at church as well, we like to think that we're decent neighbours, so I like to do things like organise meetings, you know, when they're going to dig up the street and do changes to the streetscape, we like to organise meetings. Sheila referred to kind of built environment, and I'm a great lover of the built environment and its role in kind of promoting interaction between people, and I'm keen on all of that. I'm keen on the city being a livable city. But actually, of course, there are a lot of people living in our city, and the problem I have is that there's just so many people that you see day by day, and you can't have meaningful relationships with all of them. We just can't, can we? But it's about trying to make sure that we do encourage meaningful relationships where we can, and make it easier by a little bit less rushing past each other and a bit more, you know, the physical environment can help us to actually relate a bit, I think.
I'm Richard. I'm one of Quarantine's 2 artistic directors. I guess the thing that I was going to say about what I do has a sort of, I'm thinking about it in the context of neighbourliness. We set Quarantine up 20 years ago, last November, and for the first 5-6 years we ran the company from the spare bedroom in our flat on the other side of town in what is now rebranded the Northern Quarter. It was then the council estate. There's something very bookended about this shift from starting the company in that space there at a period of time, I guess, when we first started the company, the population of the city of Manchester was somewhere in the region of 2,000 people, and then immersing ourselves in this project here on the other side of town in another city, with a population that's exploded and is exploding even more. I no longer live in Manchester. I moved out about 10 years ago. Mostly, I guess, if in hindsight, I think it's because I'm not necessarily very comfortable with or fond of what seems to be happening with the city, and that has a lot to do with the neighbourhood and neighbourliness, I think.
Do you mean the city centre? Do you mean when you say Manchester? Do you mean Manchester city centre?
Yeah, I think in that. Yeah, because I only ever lived.
Because nobody lived in the city centre.
Yeah.
Only a few decades ago.
Yeah. So
okay.
In the city, when we lived in the city centre, there were 2,000 people living there. So now we moved out about 8-9 years ago. Live in Yorkshire now. Live in an apartment, rent an apartment in a block that is also used as a kind of hotel, like those apartment hotels. So very few of our neighbours are permanent. Most of them are very transitory. I think that has a big effect. Living in an apartment has a very different relationship with your neighbours if you live in an apartment. And I think I disappoint myself as a neighbour. I think I'm a very passive neighbour, and I kind of wish that I wasn't. I don't think it's maybe not how I want to be, and I think I get very, perhaps, nostalgic in looking back at my childhood experience of neighbourliness, growing up in a small industrial town in Derbyshire, in the Midlands. So on a street where my parents seemed to know mostly everybody who lived on that street and had a relationship with them and some kind of connection and lots of social gatherings and kids playing with each other, etc. Maybe that's just about age, or maybe it's something about the change in the times we live in, but I wish I could kind of counter my own passivity somehow to be a different kind of neighbour, but I think I have to change the circumstances that I live in to do that.
I'll interrupt you. Hello, my name's Lucy. I'm a senior lecturer at the School of Architecture in Manchester. My specialism is urban design, so actually what I do all the time is the kind of thing that you touched already, thinking about how the design of neighbourhoods and bits of cities can create opportunities for communities to develop, for interactions, all sorts of interesting things to happen, and to make sure that they don't preclude that in the way that they're designed as well. Quite a lot of the strange discussions that happen in my discipline get excited about stuff like designing out crime, which people have different positions on, but I belong to the camp and you can't design out crime, but you can, in the physical design of an environment, create opportunities for interaction, and you can create opportunities for other less desirable activities to take place as well. And that design, I would say, is about the physical layout, but it's also the process of that design and the extent to which you engage a community and a prospective community for a new area in that process, and trying to do that in a meaningful way, which is often really actually suboptimal and clunky. That's an interesting thing to try and understand and do better. In my personal life, I suppose I'm a great neighbour. I'm really good. In my immediate interactions with people, I think I quite enjoy that. I find it quite grounding to have that surrounding and knowing who's who and helping each other a bit, to a point where you still maintain a certain degree of privacy. But I'm also really conscious that because of my sort of professional life, I have moved around quite a bit. So in the last 5 years, I've relocated from Edinburgh to London to rural Yorkshire and now to Manchester or Salford. And each time I'm kind of part of a problem that I equally in my professional life am trying to solve, that kind of process of gentrification, where an area that I feel really drawn to because of what's going on there changes because of a demographic like me that moves in, changes the values of an area, changes the types of activities that happen or don't happen anymore there. And it's a bit of an impasse in a way, and a process that I feel guilty of being part of, but also finding so many interesting, new, exciting places to explore. It's a bit of a luxury. Which way we go?
I'm Rennie. I'm the other artistic director of Quarantine, and I think, like Richard, I don't think I'm as good a neighbour as I'd like to be. And it's partly the thing about living in an apartment. It's partly about my personal circumstances. I can't walk around that well, and I can't do that much physically. So I'm more reliant on other people than I am proactive, which is kind of strange. I think that's fairly new for me. I think I'd really like to have neighbours. But we don't really have them. And yeah, I know Josephine, who owns the building and lives downstairs, so she's kind of a neighbour. But she's really great. She takes in loads of parcels and keeps a set of keys for me, and comes round with slices of cake if she bakes something new that she wants to try. And it's amazing. It's lovely to be on the receiving end of that. But I don't reciprocate as often as I might do.
Good evening, everyone. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I agree with the best of greetings. Islamic tradition, peace upon you all. Thank you. I guess I should ask my neighbours. There's no point asking me. I'm going to say I'm the best neighbour. But I'm a very intolerant neighbour. While everyone's talking about their stories about how nice they are to talk to their neighbours, I don't. I hate people being on top of me when I go home. I see people all day. The job I do is so people focused that I want my home to be a sanctuary. However, I live in near the city centre, terrace housing, you're not going to get it. And I'm the guy, I hate when you park in my parking space. I hate it. I hate the bin wars. In some of the side housings, they've got the big communal bins. And so there's some of us that are lucky enough to have our own bin. They get shrinking smaller and smaller. It's like a fight. I'm not joking. I mean, I'm sitting there Friday morning, panicking if anyone stole my bin. Honestly, I get up and I'm like, what are you doing? have to check that our bins are there. We've got a number in it in big, illuminate numbers, so if anyone steals it. And honestly, I've been around the street at 1 in the morning with my torch phone looking who stole our bin. I'm a very intolerant neighbour. The other day I was at home and I got a very rare lion, and the next door neighbours to our right, all of a sudden I had a load of kids playing in the back garden, and it just drove me mad. I was like, why can't you take them to the park? Why? I was just so, for an hour and a half I was just counting down till they went inside the house. I don't like noise, I hate hearing anything, I'm very sensitive to it. And also the problem is in our area, in Longside, on the main road, a lot of the houses have turned into like businesses. So on the main road where I live, it's a lot of accountants. So the next door to our left, in the daytime it's an accountant, and then upstairs in the evening they just got some new tenants in. And so in the day it's like a business is operating next door. You can hear it, and so it's not very homely. And so it's very off-putting. And then to the right there, it's just flat. You know, different families living in there. And so I'm an intolerant neighbour. I hate people encroaching upon my space, but I think it's increasingly difficult. Someone mentioned over there that it's very busy. Manchester's becoming very busy, and I think that's part of the issue, that you can't have that space. And again, obviously, when I talk, I'm going to talk about what it means to be a neighbour. If we're defining an immediate neighbour, I guess I'm very polite. As long as you don't park in my space, I'll say hello to you in the morning. But then even like rubbish, I'm intolerant of people throwing things on the ground. I hate walking the streets and seeing that our area is a mess. I hate the fact that people don't care about their area. I hate the fact that people don't take care about other people. And in that I'm a good neighbour insofar as I know my actions affect other people, so I will try and do my part. But it doesn't work if no one else is doing theirs. And I think that's what my issue is. That's why I'm an intolerant neighbour, because it's no good me being a model and everyone else around me working in chaos. But I think I'll hopefully learn some lessons from tonight, from all of you good neighbours, and take that back to where I live and hopefully spread some cheer. I don't know how positive I can be, but let's see.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I feel like bins are going to be a really central part of the conversation on neighbourliness.
Show you the bin plan later.
Yeah, the bin schedule for this house is very complicated. So I'm going to pass over to Mike now, who's going to give us a provocation, and then when Mike's finished, Cam will give us our name.
Can I just say, can I offer anyone drinks? Please help yourselves as much as you can. If anyone wants a drink, please help yourself as much as you can. I'll top up.
Thanks, Sarah. So, as a philosopher, there are a couple of worries. One, you're going to talk about things that are really abstract, as we tend to do, and they don't engage with things that people are actually concerned with. And thankfully, things that people have said around the table tonight tie into some of the issues I was going to focus on. So I'm really pleased that I won't be way too abstract and just talking for myself. And the second thing is, it is pretty abstract, so I'm interested in what neighbourliness is and why it's a virtue and why it's a particular good. So that's the general thing I want to talk about for the next 15-20 minutes. So I think most people will agree that neighbourliness is a good thing, and then philosophers at this point tend to ask really annoying why questions. So it occurs to me, if I've been asked to speak about neighbourliness and we think it's a good thing, then I'm interested in why it's a good thing. And so I did some thinking about that, and then I came up with an answer that might strike people as rather cynical, and yet it has quite a lot of parallels in socio-functionalist accounts of various emotions and coordination problems. And the idea is this: we have certain coordination problems that are generated by the fact that we are rational, self-interested individuals. And being a rational, self-interested individual is fine if it's just you on your own. So if it's my Friday night and I have to choose between staying in and reading a book or going to the party, since I prefer reading, then it's rational for me to do what's in my best interest, and that's a sensible choice. And so being a rational, self-interested person is fine if you're the only person affected. It causes problems if you then engage with other rational, self-interested individuals and they act in the same way. So here's a kind of standard example of a coordination problem. So on my way to work, there's a really nice park with really nice grass, and I could walk on the path around it, and it takes me 5 minutes longer to get to work, or I could walk across the grass. Now, since 5 minutes, since I'm usually late, 5 minutes is important, and since it's only me, then it seems rational to me as a self-interested individual to walk across the grass. The problem is if everyone else thinks in that same way, rational self-interested people, we're all like that, then suddenly we have a public good that's ruined. Namely, it's ruined because everyone is behaving selfishly. From each and every one of our standpoint, that's the rational thing to do, but if everyone behaves in that way, things go bad and we lose the public good. And that's a common coordination problem that we see iterations of that all over the place.
Do you not just also get a new path that might be a better design because people won't go that way?
That would be a practical solution, but let's suppose, you know, and there are lots of iterations like that. So you might think another one is what you do with litter. So my car's a mess, I could throw the litter out the window. It's only me littering, and from my perspective it makes me a lot happier if I've got a clean car. But if everyone else does that, then there's litter everywhere and again. So there's coordination problems if everyone acts in a self-interested manner. So what do we do to stop these coordination issues and protect our public goods? Well, you might come up with contracts and rules. You might have signs saying stay off the grass. You might try and have a contract with everyone to say we ought not to behave in that way. But one, that's fragile. Two, how do we get people to sign up to the contract? Three, you know, people just don't listen to rules and ignore the signs. So that might be a fragile, really ineffective way of protecting public goods. Some people think that the best way to protect public goods and solve these problems is to get people to be emotional. In particular, to have certain emotional dispositions that short-circuit self-interested behaviour. So guilt would be one of them. If you get people to feel guilty walking across the grass, chances are they wouldn't do it anymore because that would be a commitment for them to do something that from the short term is not good for their self-interest, but in the long term it is. I think civic virtues might be like that. I think civic virtues are ways in which we have emotional dispositions, we're educated into them, our peers put pressure on us to have these, in a way that short circuits self-interested behaviour in a way that's good for everyone. Now in a way that's a kind of strategic, maybe cynical view of what neighbourliness is, but it's a way in which we solve this problem of rational self-interested individuals trying to think in rational self-interested terms. So maybe neighbourliness, on the one hand, is an emotional disposition to care about communal goods that we've been inculcated to have, that we've been educated to have, that we are pressured to have, because in the long run that's going to be good for all of us. It's a cynical view because lots of people think similar accounts of other emotions are like that, and one is which is really controversial, love. So some people think love is a coordination problem. Love solves a coordination problem. Here's the problem. You have to invest and commit to one person for the rest of your life. And if you're rational and self-interested, at some stage you might think there are possibilities for defection and infidelity. Better people will come along and your partner's thinking the same thing. And so if you're both rational and self-interested, you know that at some stage there will be defection and infidelity, so you don't commit in the first place. Why? Because you're not going to commit resources to a relationship if you know you're both rational and self-interested and you will defect. How to stop that happening? You need a commitment device, something that makes people stay in relationships even when short-term you can benefit by being unfaithful. And that's what love is.
I'm trying not to interrupt.
Some people... so that's not going to fit on a Hallmark card, but some people think that's why we have emotional disposition to commit to other people, because it short-circuits our natural selfishness. So that would be another case where you have a coordination problem and you need emotions to solve it. So that might be the origin of civic virtue. Emotional disposition to help other people. So that's why it might be a good thing. Second question is, what is it? What is neighbourliness and why might it be a virtue? Well, virtues are in general excellences of individuals or of groups that help the individuals or groups to flourish. And neighbourliness might be a virtue and excellence of a group that helps the group to achieve certain really important goals. And I take it very generally the goals of a group that neighbourliness is supposed to promote are kind of communal welfare. communal well-being, the way that we all flourish together, and there might be practical aspects of that. So you might think a cleaner neighbourhood, a safer neighbourhood, a neighbourhood where there's solidarity, a neighbourhood where there's shared spaces. These are all practical goods that neighbourliness might support. But the psychological benefits as well, a sense of trust, a sense of community, a sense of comfort, a sense of solidarity. Well-being is associated with doing things for other people, and so we were talking about this before, that you enhance your own well-being if you do things for other people. So there are psychological goods that neighbourliness might secure as well. So you might think that's the goal of neighbourliness, to secure communal welfare by social coordinated activity. But then you might think, what are our motives? So you have a cynical motive at the beginning, but in terms of our personal motives and emotional motives for this, a couple really are prominent. And this relates to a number of things people said about what neighbourliness is and why it might be good. One is sociability and friendliness and a desire to be a good neighbour. You might think that neighbourliness involves a lot of these, and that's why people are neighbourly. They're compassionate people, they care, they concern, and that's why you want to help other people. So you might think that motive is core to our neighbourly activity. But there's another one that might seem to be in tension with that. And one of the really good things and valuable things about neighbourliness is that it's comforting because you're not too close. You have people who you're in really close personal relationships with, family and friends, and you have strong obligations. And as you know, family and friends, Richard, can be burdensome. And you might think one of the things that neighbourliness it does, it gives you social comfort, as in there are people you can rely on. Maybe in emergencies, maybe if you just need someone to water your plants when you're away, maybe if you just need someone to help with things, you can rely on them, but they're at a distance. They're at a particular distance, so they're not as close and perhaps not as burdensome as people who are close family members. So here's why neighbourliness is difficult, and here's why you might think it's a virtue, and here's why it takes a long time to develop, and here's why all the different demographics and social changes in Manchester might be destructive of it. It's a skill. It takes a skill to be sensitive to times in which you ought to be friendly and help and offer to help, and times in which you need your distance. Conviviality and respect for privacy, those things have to be balanced. And in order to get that balance, you have to understand the social rules and regulations. You have to understand the display rules. In this particular community, is a nod enough? Is that enough? Or do you stop and say hello? Do you knock on the door when people come in the neighbourhood and welcome them and introduce yourself and maybe offer them a gift? Or is that really intrusive? So in order to be skillful and develop the sensitivity, you have to have understanding, and that understanding typically takes a long time to develop. And that's why virtuous people are rare, because they've developed this for a long time, and that's why you might think, oh, so here's examples of kind of different display rules. Saying hello to people in Glasgow on the street and smiling is perfectly okay. London, it's not.
Yeah,
London is not. In Finland, so a philosopher, Martha Nussbaum, jogging through a forest in Finland, and waved and said hello to a couple of people jogging, and they reacted with utter horror, because that's massively intrusive. And in London, yeah, you just don't do that. You wouldn't sit next to someone on the tube and smile and say hello and no. But whereas in Glasgow, people talk to each other possible. So learning those display rules of what's acceptable requires time, and it requires you to be embedded in the community. And so that's why neighbourliness is difficult and complex, because to be a good neighbour you have to understand all these things. And that's why the really good neighbours are ones who are skillful enough, and we spent a lot of time in the area, you've got to know people, you've got to know what's acceptable and what's not acceptable in that area. And that's why it's difficult. Final thing I want to talk about is things that might hamper it. And one is not being able to see other people, not being able to meet people on the street, and just the nod or the wave when you're driving past and you recognise someone. And usually those small-scale interventions and communications are the building blocks for larger-scale ones. When you say, would you look after my plant for the weekend, or here are my keys, can you take the mailer? And they're larger interventions as well when you join in some community venture. But without visibility, without seeing people regularly, you're not going to have the nodding acquaintance, which is really important. There's always going to be free riders. There's always going to be people, even if most of us are guilty about walking across the grass, some people don't care. So some people will take advantage of the fact that most people are neighbourly, and they will just abuse the bins. And so that's always going to happen. But a third one is size. And so interesting empirical work shows that the larger the community, the less easy it is to be neighbourly. And partly because responsibility is shared, and then if you're like me, you tend to backslide. If it's a really small group and we're all committed to this project, I'm pretty sure I'll do my job, because if I don't, well, it'll be if there's a community of 80 people, 100 people, I think someone else will do it. It's not that I'm being lazy, just that, well, someone else will pick up the slack. And so when communities get too large, then individual obligation decreases. And so that would be, again, one of the ways in which neighbourliness, I think, is hampered. Building design, community design, all of these things are ways in which you might think the deep skill set, which is essential to neighbourliness, is problematised. That's a whole bunch of things, things I've said. So hopefully some people can pick up on it in the discussion to follow. Thank you.
Thank
you. Does anyone, I can see you biting your tongue, does anyone have an immediate response to anything that Mike has said?
I thought it was interesting that you picked the lawn as a kind of metaphor, because isn't that part of kind of the way in which British society controls people, so that parks and lawns and grass. So my thing was around, we had a cockerel that escaped from somewhere. I wondered, does it apply to animals? This cockerel just appeared and walked across the lawn, and then someone was chasing it, and it became a fun game that this cockerel was out there. It changed the rules. So I just wondered, how does it kind of work in thinking about those things or those people that might break some of these rules that could kind of shake up how we think about these things.
I guess it depends upon the nature of the public good. And if in the case of the lawn you think actually that's not a public good, that's something that isn't there to be preserved, it's there to be used and walked upon, and if it's destroyed, or we put a new path in. So I think that it was a metaphor for ways in which self-interested behaviour, if everyone does it, can cause problems. But I think that's a really good point. It depends on what we think a public good is. So I just lived near Kelvin Grove Park in Glasgow, and it's a really nice park. And over the last summer they had 4 or 5 music festivals there. And it was mobbed, and there was loads of litter, and it was really noisy, and it was, in a way, it was great because there were loads of music festivals. But I found myself getting really, like Mohammed, really annoyed here because it was dead noisy, and that's my park. It's my park. It's part of my neighbourhood. And so, what's the nature of the public good? Is the public good things that people around Kelvin Grove Park, it's their park and they can use it, or is it something that should be available to everyone in Glasgow to put on music festivals? And I think it's a really interesting question. What's the nature of a public good in that case, and how should we preserve it? Should Glasgow preserve Kelvin Grove Park by just nice and quiet and not that many people, or should there be some massive festivals? That's a really nice question.
As part of the bigger, this project, Tenancy, sits within a bigger frame of a European project which has other partners in other countries, and one of the partners is in Marrakesh in Morocco, and we were there a couple of weeks ago taken on a tour by a project that's looking at the city's relationship with water and waterways, and water and waterways in the city are very contested, and a lot of dialogue there, a lot of discussion around the idea of the commons, of spaces or facilities, or in this case fountains that used to traditionally serve a common purpose within communities within specific geographical areas. So it tended to be the case that within particular areas, I think they call them a derb, so a little cluster of houses and streets, each one would have a fountain, and people would go and meet at the fountain. They get their water from there over time, perhaps didn't even need to get their water as water arrived in houses, but it was still a common meeting point and a place where not only could you kind of socialise with your neighbours, but you could sort of check up on people. You could make sure that the elderly neighbour was okay if they hadn't shown up, or if there might be kids that would take water from one neighbour to another. The fountain that we were shown on the street just around the corner from where we were staying, the fountain had been cut off because it had been the building immediately behind it had been bought by a property developer to turn it into a riad, a hotel for tourists. And they saw no need, they didn't need to keep the fountain going any longer. So it was this kind of cut off water supply with still the facade of the fountain, but of course no longer could anyone use it, and so that public space now lacked a commons, a meeting place, a shared space that was to the benefit of all. And I think it feels to me like that's one of the things that, one of the factors of neighbourhoods and neighbourliness that's vitally important about how do we create our common space. It's not just our public spaces, but our common spaces. How do we use them and who controls them? How do we decide how they're used? I think for me one of the big questions is about I have a great sense that the city of Manchester and perhaps the city of Salford, it feels like our ways of living often feel like they're being curated or designed by somebody else for us, and I sometimes struggle with the ways in which I might find, or other people might find our way into that.
I think the things that I was biting my lip on, a number of things, all of which are quite big conversations, but just from what you're saying, one of them is, I do think I certainly at times have what is just fundamentally like a nostalgia for something that probably wasn't really there anyway. And there's lots of thinking about that and stories and things even within my family and the history of a city and the history of a place, and this idea that, well, things were better then and now that this has changed it's not as good, so that there's a problem with neighbourliness now, and it's, well, I don't think that's necessarily the case at all.
Recent surveys support you. So
yeah.
The pessimistic thing is everyone thinks it's declining, and recent surveys in the last 10 years say it's not declined in the last 10 years.
So there are two very contrasting pictures I've got in my head as we have that conversation. One is, you know, my father was brought up in an Irish Catholic ghetto in absolute poverty in North Liverpool in the 1920s. This was not a neighbourly place, you know, and there's a kind of false historic sentiment around, oh, everybody knew each other and everybody supported each other. And his personal stories to me about that are just that, well, do you know what? It wasn't like that. Maybe it was just him, the one amongst the millions, you know. But I don't know. But I think there's something worth researching about how valid some of that stuff is. And then just more recently, it struck me when I was with one of the developers just up the road that has developed something, you know, so buy to rent, you know, the developers and the managers, the very best ones in Manchester and Salford, they're highly managed, you know, they're highly legalistic contracts about how you're going to live when you arrive here. And there's a development over the road called Slate Yards. Don't know if you know it, yeah. And it's one of the first of these types of developments where you can have a pet. So the group of young people who were there.
Not that it stops people having pets.
Yeah, I know, but of that type of development,
Officially,
that very new buy to rent. But the other thing is that I hadn't realised, I was talking to them, that the average length of the tenancy there is 9 months. So there's a kind of, and the manager there was describing to me the sociability of the people with pets compared to other places. I thought that was quite interesting. And they do tend to go to bed early because they're going to get up early to go and walk the dog. It's like a different group of people, but also they're only there for 9 months. And it did strike me in the conversation just then, I also don't believe necessarily it takes a long time to work out the rules. So I think I think people are, and maybe young people are, and people who don't remember any other way of doing things, they work out the rules. Like there's the legal rules, like there's your agreement. But I think people are reading social situations and who they're working with and who they're dealing with quicker than the idea, oh, well, you have to have been here for years to fit in. I think that's worth researching more, because I don't think that's the case. I think it's almost as if everything's speeding up. So people are interpreting things really quickly and say, right, I'm going to live here for the next 10 months. This is how it's going to work. This is who I like. This is who I don't like. And it's kind of, I don't think it is a lifetime anymore.
I don't think it's a lifetime, but I think it does take time, however long time is. But it does take time. And I think, you know, with neighbourliness and being social, I think it's not something that should be dictated to people, you know, as to how they should live. And you know, because I have seen, you know, things where they say, you know, you can buy this house but you can't have any pets. It's like, well, I'm not going to be buying that. Not that I've got a pet, because again, I think that's dictating to people how they should live socially.
There's a lot of that,
you know,
in the city centre.
And I think that should be allowed to happen naturally. You know, if people want to socialise, then they socialise. If they don't want to, then, you know, they don't have to. And then going back to something else that you said, and you said as well, I think, you know, where people were, well, in my eyes, neighbourly, where, you know, you did borrow things from the neighbour. I mean, it used to happen in our street. You know, we did used to do that. There was a difference between people that lived on this side of the street compared to that side, because this side, the houses were all privately owned, and that side, it was all council owned. So, you know, there was a difference. I think they, you know, this side made it known that they were council, that side made it known that we were private. But when we had the street parties, everybody would still come out, you know, and still get on, and the children would still all play together, you know. But I think even that neighbourliness, like you said, I think what people tend to do, you do tend to learn who you can talk to, who you can't talk to, you know, who's the grumpy one, or who's the grumpy one, or who's the happy one.
My dad was the grumpy one.
You know, you can go and knock on their door, you know, because, you know, even now I've got some neighbours that you just think, oh, forget it. You know, I've tried, you know, forget it, because that's just the way they are. But then that's just the way they are. But even all of that is part of being neighbourly, you know, knowing who your neighbours are, what your neighbours are about, rather than us just shutting ourselves off. And I like what you said, you know, about the emotional, you know, bit, having an emotional tie to something that is for the benefit of all. I suppose I'm listening to that thinking, oh, maybe that's what my work does, you know, but I've never looked at the philosophical side of it, you know, we just get things done. But I think that's interesting, because I think, if you don't have an emotional tie to something, it doesn't necessarily, I mean, it's not particularly bothering you, you don't really care, you know, and you would always feel, and I think because we have so many rules, you know, around the societies that we live in, you always know that somebody else is going to do it, or somebody else is going to sort it out, you know, and a lot of the times, I think in these day and age, a lot of us do feel, well, it's not my problem, you know, it's somebody else's problem. And
People can be more passive, can't they? If you take any group of people, not everybody is the same emotional makeup, so the idea of being more passive in your emotions as part of a community, I don't see that being a problem. And some of those virtues of being a neighbour, when you start describing them in more detail, I start to feel, my experience of certain places would be, I would feel suffocated by the rules or the unwritten rules, but also just, it's kind of, I was brought up on a council estate in Liverpool, and the only thing I ever wanted to do was leave. You know, it's like I just found the fact that I could still tell you the names, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, Mr. and Mrs. Schooler, what car they had, all the way around the whole of the road. I can tell you all of the families and the people. But I don't think of it as something I wanted to belong to. You know.
I mean, I totally get the point about the distance, and I think that's really, really important, which is why I think not the fact that you know everyone and it's a close community in that sense doesn't necessarily mean it's a neighbourly community.
I like the idea of it being lovely, but the reality, my reality was that it wasn't lovely.
What's interesting is what you said fits in slightly what Erinma was saying, that, you know, when you've got people who are living in their privately owned, they own the house, that's their area, they live there, they're invested in it. When it's social housing, people think, well, I might be moving on, renting. They don't feel that sense of, well, it's not belonging, or it's not theirs. They're not going to be there. They don't want to invest that much emotional energy into it. And it is an investment of emotional energy. It is to go around getting to know people, talking to people, and then building a bond, and then you having to break that when you know you're moving in 9 months. But also the idea that when you've got more people, you're less likely to be neighbourly than when you've got less, because of the idea that there's eyes watching on your accountability. You're less accountable if there's more people. Like students, they come, they'll mess around, and then they know they're leaving in a short, and then they have that where they're messing around. Fallowfield has a lot of problems with parties, and they don't need to get to know their neighbours. People have been living there for years, residents, because they don't see themselves as residents. They see themselves as renters. They're coming in for a 9 to 10 month lease, and then they're off. And so their idea of neighbourliness is not as important, so they don't need to get to know their neighbours. It's not their area. Their home is somewhere else. And that's always been true. And that's also, you could say, true with maybe immigrant communities coming in. Because I was saying to someone the other day that there's always this idea of going back home, and the older generation will talk about back home, South Asians especially, but there's no back home anymore. This is home now. When you're going to start accepting that this is your home? And that's part of the issue we have with my generation, the younger generation, because for them, this is all they know. They haven't been back home. Home is Manchester, home is where they've been brought up, and so a sense of belonging and to have an idea of identity makes you, I guess, treat where you live differently. Because if you feel like I've got kind of ownership of it and this is mine, then you're going to want to make it clean, you're going to want to make it nice, you're going to want to get to know people because you might need them. If you don't have that sense, for whatever reason, if you're an immigrant, if you're in social housing, if you're only renting, then you're not going to have that.
But I think that's the point I was trying to make, was that I suspect that in some of these younger groups of people who are living in apartments, even if it's only for say 10 months, and I don't mean necessarily students, because a lot of the working population of this city live in these places. It's a different sort of experience compared to say my age group. But I suspect that they have almost done a deal with themselves, like, I am only going to be here for this length of time. But that's not a negative thing. It's like, I'm here, I understand how this works, and this is going to be a positive thing. You know, it's a buy-to-rent community. I'm here for a year, and then I'm going to be somewhere else. I might not even be in this city. But I don't think that's necessarily filled with negativity. I think there are other positive things.
I was just thinking about the comparison between the previous area I was in and here, because I was in elsewhere in Salford. I was in Seedley Langworthy area, which is predominantly terraced housing. Still quite a bit of terraced housing still there, but quite a bit of it demolished. And it was going through really tough times. But one of the things that we do as churches is we support charity. And one of the things that we traditionally do is Christian Aid Week collecting door to door. I remember going down the terrace streets in Seedley. You know, we'd deliver the envelopes, then 2 or 3 days later we'd knock on people's doors. And there were people, you do get people who go, you did get that. But you also got people who would chase you down the street because you'd moved on too quickly and they've got their envelope. You've gone on before, they're chasing you to give you their envelope. I remember one old guy who we called on and he said, here's your envelope and here's last year's. Which he had by the door for a year. Right?
He knew you were coming back.
Yeah. And there was that we didn't necessarily take huge amounts of money because it was a poor community, but people were willing to give and had no problem with you calling. Now when I moved to this area and you try calling particularly at the apartments, the reaction that you get is horror. Because if you manage to get into an apartment block, through the security, you tail down. So, if I've got my dog collar on, people often will let you through. It's one of the. It often works.
It won't work.
But it sometimes. But when we were door knocking in apartments, it was just utter like, how did you get in? What are you doing here?
It's the public and private space discussion, isn't it? So you've moved across the threshold into what is more private space in apartments.
It's a bit like knocking on someone's living room door rather than their front door.
Yeah.
They're surprised that you're there.
Yeah.
That you've already entered
But is that
private space.
You've broken the rules.
Kind of protection of space, isn't
Yeah.
it? That's very important to people, and for the right reasons, but it doesn't help with neighbourliness.
I think what really doesn't help the neighbourliness in that respect is the ambiguity. So what's very good about more traditional layouts is that you have a very clear front door and a very clear public realm. This street, we understand this is where people can walk, it might be neighbours, it might be people passing through. You get clear delineation between neighbours on one side of the street and the other side of the street, and you understand that everything behind that front door is your domain. And whether it's within an apartment block or in designs that are more like towers, residential towers, where there's a lot of space outside them on the ground level, there's that ambiguity. Who does this belong to? Not just legally, but who does it feel as if it belongs to? And therefore, are you going to take a sense of ownership over it and put plants out and sit outside there? Or are you going to just leave it alone because you're not sure? Is it going to be misused or just not used? So things like the corridors that you've been walking down, knocking on doors, I don't think anyone's really clear with who that belongs to. And the people that live in those apartments aren't necessarily, as individuals, not willing to participate in neighbourliness, but it's not clear to them what their domain is and where is the extent of what they can affect. Probably if they took some sense of ownership of that weird ambiguous space, they'd have a management company breathing down their neck saying, you can't do this, you can't put up posters here, you can't put...
People do that. I mean, occasionally when you go out in some of the, particularly the council town blocks, you will get people who put doormats outside there.
I've got a doormat. I've got a doormat.
Yes, some people try and it changes every
You're one of the only ones.
But I was going to say sort of what Sheila was saying a little bit, but the sort of neighbourliness and there's just being civil. So if you're only there for 9 months and you may not actually be invested in the apartment, but I'm talking about apartments now, invested in the apartment, there are sort of general civil rules that you follow that you the rubbish is what we've done that, but just kind of keeping things clean, things like if there's junk mail in your mailbox, rather than put it on top of the mailbox, walk 20 yards and put it into the bin, that kind of thing, and not.
It's always bins. It's always about the bin.
I hope it's the recycling bin.
Oh, recycling.
But some of these new apartment developments are designed, and what we've got are completely different sets of assumptions about how, quite often we are talking about young people, but how people are living. So I'll give you one example. There's one at Salford Quays, which is called Clippers Quay, big new grey brick thing as you go over the bridge. So it's more than 600 units. So if you think about 600 people, or double that, in a set of streets, it's more than 600 people. So there's everything we're saying about apartments, but that has been designed with a really big ground floor and basement communal space. So it's like the assumption that 20 and 30-year-olds are still going to go to the common room, and they are, but they're running businesses. So everything in those spaces is about Wi-Fi, and so it's all like little workspaces. Now it'll be interesting to see if any of that is used in the way intended and imagined in the design, but it looks so far as if it is. So again, somebody might be only there a year on their tenancy, but they're running a business sort of half of the week. Sometimes businesses are sending people up from London and they're in there, they're not even in there for a full week, they're staying 3 days of the week, and you can see them coming and going and using the coffee pot and using the Wi-Fi.
So therefore then they're not meant to be homes then, are they? They're like
hotels.
Like an apartment.
Hotels. And another question I was going to ask, I forgot you said you were an architect.
No. I think you're the architect, I'm the town planner.
I don't want to round you with that later.
I mean, you're probably going to say yes you do, but who do you consult with, before these amazing...
It's a really interesting question, because what people attempt to do is consult the community, which is already a problem, because there isn't one community, right? It's saying there isn't one public. It's not that simple. And they try to consult whoever is there already. Usually these sorts of developments are for communities that don't exist yet, for people that don't live there yet, and maybe not anywhere near. So that could be, if you're really cynical, it could be really a very poor attempt in ticking a box. At best, it's an attempt, but it's probably not the right people that you're talking to, and how you get to them is really difficult.
The client is the investor. So that scheme I just spoke to you about, this has been this is a provocation now. Yeah, is
I happen to know the
right.
developer by the way.
Right, yeah. So
Just to let you know.
I'm not.
You say what you like.
I'm not slagging it off. It's just it's very typical of what is very current at the moment. So it's an interesting one to watch to see how it works out.
Yeah.
So the investor has £80 million and says we're going to do this development,
It's
and so the architect designs in a process which is, well, what are we going to do on this site? How does it work? What colour are the bricks? How many apartments? And there's all sorts of regulations about that. And then you hope that there's some imagination in there as well. And there is a little, there is, but it's kind of, there weren't a whole bunch of people that were consulted about, should we do this? It was their land, it was they who invested their money, and they are now taking in rent from more than 600 people. Thank you very much. It's just that's happening around the whole of the city to such an extent. You just hope there's enough people to continue to pay the rent.
It could be an interesting research thing to find out how much people do use the communal spaces in these, because where I am in Ancoats, the new apartments there, all of them have some communal space. It's very rarely used.
People would rather sit in a coffee shop and use the Wi-Fi there.
Because they can talk to real people. Real people.
It's like the living room in an old people's home, isn't it? It's like, I don't know if you've any experience of that. I have. It's kind of, when you first visit it, you think, oh, this is nice, Mum. And years later you realise no one sits in that space.
There's the same old bezzers sat there who are really annoying that nobody else wants to be there.
It's different,
tricky. And I suppose with all these properties going up, I mean, we do have the issue of homelessness, we've got all these fantastic buildings that are going up. And most of them are empty. They might be being rented here and there, like you've said, or alluded to. Some of them are not even used every day of the week.
Some of them are not, no. There's one statistic, because even as somebody involved in this business, I was still taken aback when a statistic. There are 15,000 apartments under construction right now. So as you're looking at the cranes in Manchester City Centre, includes this bit of Salford, up to the Crescent, but that core piece, it doesn't include the quays. So 15,000 new apartments under construction on top of what's already hit, and that includes obviously the massive skyscrapers.
Those two.
Then there's many more of those coming.
I've done a count up of the apartments being built in Salford Trinity Parish. And we reckon that because the population of the parish, when I first started, it was officially 123 people. We reckon it's now about 6,000. But
so
if you multiply the apartments that are being built by 1.7, which is the city average, city centre average, occupancy rate, we'll have a population of 12,000. It's currently doubling. What is here already? That's
So you kind of then, I guess, you think, well, who is that? Well, it's workers coming into Manchester for the jobs that are here, mainly in offices. Not entirely, but mainly in offices.
It's weird because we said this the other day at universities. Then the Manchester, that means people are getting jobs who live here then. So people outside are coming in. You've got very different types of neighbourhoods within Manchester, and they see all these beautiful buildings, but they're not getting a part of it. They're not looking, they're not from, they're not them, they're not like them. So then where do they go? And that's a massive issue, because you're seeing all this development, but they're not getting it. We said this the other day in our meeting that we have this sense of everything's going great around us, but in the smaller areas, Moss Sides, the Ardwicks, the Longsides, it's not translating into jobs or work for them. They don't feel involved. It's not their city. City centre is not for the people of Manchester anymore. It feels like it's for outside people coming in, and that's a massive problem. Maybe
some of the outside. A point I quite often make to the older community is that some of the people who are living in the city centre are the grandkids, are the children of the people who moved out of the city. So people who grew up in Salford often moved out to Tildesley or Bolton or Lee or like moved out, and it's their kids that now want to live in the city centre. So, but they're jumping over the communities, the poorer communities, like that make the donuts around the city centre. I mean, that's not obviously people living in the city centre are also from all over the world. But
I'd say
that sort of element.
the other thing I'd throw in is the idea that these are all luxury penthouses is just absolutely not true. There are some, so
some of them
Pep, lives, and it was the single most expensive apartment sale.
He's done a lot for the city, Pep Guardiola.
Yes.
I think that's City fan.
Yeah, so we've got red here and blue, so I keep looking at my phone. Apologies. City are playing tonight.
Yes, they are.
I keep having a look at my phone.
Tell me the score on bet.
Yeah, Tottenham.
So going back to what you were saying, they're not luxury apartments.
They're not all the idea. There are some. A lot of them
they're not affordable.
They're not affordable. That's the problem, isn't it?
Just a reminder that we're live streaming. So Kate's getting her ears blown off from me all at once.
I wonder if there's something about this what is in the public interest, or the commons, which you mentioned, the Cockerel kind of reminded me of it, and whose responsibility it is. Because I think there's something about city councils that you've got the responsibility of the neighbours who live in a place. There's a responsibility, I think, from the council, who, you know, my mom's from Denmark, and there they had a restriction on how high you can build buildings. Unfortunately, there's one building that's now broken that and found a way to do it because it had lots of investment from some shipping company. There were ways around these things, but I think there's something about Manchester and how Manchester could be thinking about, common good, our health, our air quality, our cycle paths. So the way that I've been introduced to that in Manchester is I cycle to work from home in Old Trafford. The quickest way is to cycle, but the rapid developments that have happened on my way to Salford, where the road just suddenly has opened up in front of me and not thought about how cyclists will navigate around this new craziness, is, I think, to some extent really irresponsible. Whereas a city like Denmark has been designed to think about not the car, but the cyclists. So I wonder if there's something about, what's the responsibility of the city council in terms of its ability and its reach and its power to create a city that then enables that people can see, we've made a city that's healthy for the residents. And I think that care for how Manchester's designed is just not present, and I don't feel like it's in the interest of the people that live here.
I thought there was a restriction on how high they could go, and all of a sudden they're going higher than that. Because they pulled a load of flats down, and now that's high-rise blocks, and now they're building them all back up again, and I think they're actually higher than what the last ones were. Yeah.
They're the highest residential blocks almost anywhere in the UK.
We have here.
Yeah. They don't build that high in Glasgow.
No.
In fact, they don't build high at all in Glasgow anymore, do they?
I mean, it's striking contrast between Glasgow and when I come back to Manchester seems much closer to a city like London than it does to Glasgow. So with the cycle path, is that...
The cycle paths are kind of, they just don't continue in the way that they continue.
And if they are developed, it's a bit of an afterthought, it's not built into the planning, is that
very, very nice.
Well, what will happen is say there's a new development around the back of Media City, and basically there'll just be this massive oversight about the cycle path will stop, the road will pass it, and then someone will have forgotten to think how it joins up. So the way that the cycle path joins up is kind of like over there, and it just doesn't quite connect. And so as a cycle, they're not thinking about, some people cycle, some people drive, some people walk. They're not thinking about, you're still designed around the car, which I find quite frustrating in time.
And it does really preclude neighbourliness, because people get in their car and they're then in a bubble. It doesn't give the opportunity.
That's another private space, isn't it?
It's a very private space, and it means you're going past things without going to. You're not going to stop spontaneously. You're not going to talk to someone on your way past. And in fact, it's slightly dehumanising as well. People get that kind of the kind of vision sets in where they're in their car, they behave differently to how they would with other people, other drivers even, than if they were face to face. So that aspect of cities as well can be really, really unhelpful in supporting communities evolving.
Can I say, sorry, the chef, this is amazing. So thank you so much.
Yeah, good.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm pretending that they're just there in the background. So thank you so much for it.
It's so tasty, isn't it?
Sorry, what were you going to say?
No, it's so tasty.
Just to say that we'll talk around Mike's provocation for another 5 or 10 minutes or so while we eat our dinner, and then we're going to move on to the next speaker. So if anyone has anything, I'm conscious that we've begun talking quite a lot about developments and like sort of enclosed spaces that we live in relation to neighbourliness, which we can carry on talking about. But just to sort of, we've got about 10 minutes more on this. If there was anything else from what Mike said that people wanted to pick up on.
Can I ask a philosophical question again? Can I ask a philosophical question? Yeah. Why are virtues good things to have?
It's from a Greek term that just means excellence. So the way it's just defined as an excellence, and just as tables can have excellences in cars, and Aristotle and other Greek philosophers thought people can have excellences as well. And excellences are things that make you or the object perform or function well. So the virtue of a knife would be sharpness, because a sharp knife can cut well, and the function of a knife is to cut. And so Aristotle thought that human beings had excellences as well, and that's what the virtues are. So almost by definition, they're going to be good things. And one of the interesting things is, I find this relates to neighbourliness and the context. What counts as a virtue might be relative. There are a lot of relative virtues. In certain cultures, something would be a virtue. In other cultures, it wouldn't be a virtue. But there might be universal virtues as well, universal excellences that we all, that any individual needs. So you might courage is one of them. It's difficult to think about a flourishing life without some degree of courage and risk taking. Yeah. One of the things I like to mention, and I didn't, but it's the way in which neighbourliness can be comforting, and neighbours can be comforting precisely because they're not close family members, and that means you can talk to them more about certain things. So there's a phenomenon where, so if you meet someone, a stranger on the train, or you meet them in the coffee shop, or you meet them in the pub, and you can have a conversation which is a conversation that you wouldn't have with people who are really close to you. You can be more honest in a way. And sometimes when people talk about neighbourliness, when it gets to the level you can talk to your neighbours about problems and issues, then there's a certain honesty there that the space gives you that might be absent. I mean, things I not told my mother, and just what I would tell other people, because there's something of a distance. So I think the distance and privacy of neighbourhoods and neighbourliness is an important factor as well. That we can rely on them not just for helping out, but we can rely on them if you have issues to discuss that you wouldn't discuss with really close friends. Yeah,
it's because there's no judgment, is there? You know, it's somebody that doesn't know you, they're not going to judge you.
Yeah.
So you could tell them a whole lot of lies, really. Yeah. But you know they're not going to judge you.
But they're also close enough that you're prepared to do that, and they're close enough to you that you can listen. So there's that kind of
close enough in space.
Yeah.
In space, but not in relationships. It's not someone you see every day. You know, who may have seen you when you're angry or when you're over happy, or you know, they haven't seen you in any shape or form, so that's probably why it makes it easier to have that conversation. But then, like you said, you know, there are some communities where you wouldn't have that conversation. You know, like London, you wouldn't sit on the train or on the tube and start having a conversation with somebody.
You just reminded me of one of my grumpy bits when you were talking. Because even as a northerner, I don't buy that about London. I don't buy that about London.
Really?
I think lots of people have got experiences in London, they're just travelling through. But also if you just pick out some other experiences and focus on them, it's the counter-argument. I've got loads of examples of just what you were saying, a 10-minute dialogue. There's one quite recently which was amazing, I'll write a book about it, but it was in Euston Station where it was rammed, like sardines. And I sat next to a woman and we had a conversation, and it was like, it was brilliant. It was a most brilliant interaction in the middle of Euston Station.
Do you remember what triggered it?
Oh yeah, because there were hardly any seats, you couldn't sit down, and she just very quickly sat down, and I had bought something really healthy in Marks and Spencer's. I bought carrot and hummus dips, right? Because I was trying to eat healthy. And this woman she was a bit older than me, she was like in her 60s, and she sat down in a big heap, got out her burger and chips, and this smell was wafting, and I was laughing to myself, and I just said to her, God, I wish I'd got that. And then this sparked this amazing conversation, and she'd got off a train coming from Birmingham, and she lived in London, and she bought burger and chips in Euston and sat down to have the burger and chips before going home. Well, anyway, she told me loads of things. Well, it was a beautiful encounter, and there are many encounters that we can have, but in a city of so many millions of people, you're not going to have them every day or every 5 minutes. But I don't believe that it's this utterly obnoxious, unneighbourly sort of place. No, I know, but do you know what I mean?
I think it's less likely to have those kinds
because there's so many people.
Glasgow, you stand at a bus stop, people almost.
And it's like in this city, you can't have loads of great interactions with loads of people, and you pass them on the street and the pavements around. No, but everybody's. I think that anonymity. I find that actually comforting in a sense, in a weird sense. I like being in a city where. And it's like, look at all those faces and all those people, they don't know anything about me and I don't know them. I think that's great. I think that's a virtue.
I'm going to be there picking out the woman who spoke to you. She's from up north, she's from Birmingham.
She wasn't, she was from East London and she was on her way back having visited her boyfriend.
No, but I think when I said that, they're not very neighbourly, I mean, I was talking about, where I've lived in London. And I remember the first house that we lived in, and it was a house next to another house, and we'd moved in, and the next day, I remember coming out, oh, hello, we just moved in. They were like, I thought, oh, good morning to you. And we made that special effort, to try and get to know the neighbours. And we did get to know one of our immediate neighbours eventually.
Yeah.
But even she said,
it was different.
Yeah, she said, around everybody keeps themselves to themselves. And I think what made us click was her daughter was the same age as my son then, and so we both had young children, so that's what then made us click, but otherwise, even she said, oh no, people around here, they all keep themselves to themselves. And generally, wherever we've lived in London, because we've lived in quite a few places, that is how we
Was it a different set of ages? Was there a demographic on the ages? Because that makes a big difference.
Yeah, but not particularly, because the young lady next door, she lived with her dad. He was the owner of the house, she lived in. But we've lived in different places, we've lived in apartment blocks, and I remember when we lived in the apartment block, the only nicest fellow on our road was this gay fellow that lived at the end. He was the most nicest person. The rest of them just all kept themselves to themselves. But us and him, we were in and out of each other's flats all the time, but nobody else was. So we've had lots of different experiences. And I remember one time me and my sister, when we first found it, we were chatting away on the tube, and he was like, they're all on the favourite. And we were thinking, what they're looking at? Well, we were just talking away, but like we were saying earlier, you then get to learn the social, I don't know what you'd call it, norms that well actually when people travel on the tube they sit in silence, and nowadays everybody puts their headphones in so they can't hear anything anyway, so you then learn that's the social norm.
The tram isn't that friendly.
The tram isn't what?
The tram isn't that friendly.
Oh right.
What I mean is the tram, my experience of getting the tram in the city is not dissimilar. It's about like the tube.
But I think you can. I've been on the tube when somebody, for example, I think he was Spanish actually, and he had a guitar. He wasn't busking. He had a guitar and he started singing, and he made everybody join in a way. He just had the kind of personality that wanted everybody to join in, and everybody was talking to each other, even if they were saying, what's he up to? But it meant that everybody in the carriage in the vicinity got involved with the talk. So
that goes back to what you were saying at the beginning about the cockroller, doesn't it? Like he broke the rules. Something that interrupted the...
Something I was going to say about, again, responding to the notion that there's some kind of process or duration that needs to take place in order for neighbourliness to occur. I think there's also something about event, that event can trigger outbreaks of neighbourliness. And we know there are obvious ones and cliched versions. It's also what art tries to do, isn't it? Art tries to do it in places. we moved to Yorkshire in a town that got very badly flooded a few years ago. Contrary to its reputation, I don't find it a terribly friendly town, and I think there's something about we live in Hebden Bridge.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's rather socially divided. I think there's a population that's been there for a long time, and a population that's quite new, and some people that somewhere in between there, I think. So it has certain, like any place, has certain rules about how to function there. But when it flooded, it was utterly extraordinary. The response of people coming together, all kinds of people, all those very different, disparate communities coming together, people coming from all over the place to help out.
Where there was a hardship that was going on,
And it doesn't have to be the big things. I mean, the two incidents since I've been living where I am, where the people have come together, have been when there was a car crash outside our house, and a van drove into a car. They were all right, but everybody came out. They heard the noise, they came out, and it was actually lovely that neighbours were talking to each other. And the other incident that we had is somebody who's taken spice and had just passed out on the street, and one of the neighbours knocked on my door and said, "I think you're a vicar, aren't you?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, can you help this guy? Because he seems to have passed out." I thought, what do you want from me? But she just didn't realise what was going on. I fairly quickly realised what was going on. But it was a nice bit of interaction with neighbours. A couple of other people wandered over as we're trying to sort this guy out. And you have conversations. So it's that kind of crisis not crisis, but event. Event.
Which goes back to what you were saying about if it's for the well-being of most of the people, then people will get involved, or they show that neighbourliness.
And maybe just the chances of that happening are fewer these days than perhaps in the past. So it takes a big event like that for people to be disposed to accidents.
I'm going to use that lull in the conversation to round this part of it off and move on to our next speaker. So if it's okay, I'll pass over to you.
I'll tell you now, I'm not going to be as philosophical as he. My name's Erinma Bell, and I've been asked to come here this evening to talk about my work. I mean, I'm one of them people, when you ask me to do something, I go, yeah, and then when it gets near to the time, I think, why did I say I was going to do that? I now do consider myself as a community activist. I did refute the title for years, because I thought, no, those kind of people, they just make trouble and get up to no good. But then, I think 20 years on, I think I realised that that's kind of like what I do, but in a nice way. I set up my own charity called CARISMA, which actually stands for Community Alliance for Renewal in the South Manchester area. And the work that we're mainly involved in is anti-gun and gang crime. So basically, lowering or trying our best to lower the gun crime, gang crime issues that were happening more prevalently in Moss Side probably about 15, 20 years ago. And the group itself was actually set up as a community response to the gang crime and the gun crime that was very prevalent in South Manchester, but more so Moss Side, and the fact that in Moss Side, we got the blame for every single gunshot that was ever fired in the UK. Moss Side got the blame. I remember one time there was a shooting, I think it was Hill Green or Hill Barnes, and some of us were like, yes, it happens in other areas. But when they reported on it, they still said, which is only so many miles from Moss Side, where they had this way, we were like, see, we get the blame again. So CARISMA was set up as a community response, basically as a response of some of us wanting to do something about it and saying, look, enough's enough, not only with the shootings that were happening, but enough is enough of, the demonising of our community, the demonising, of black people. Because when shootings happened, they were always, most often than not, labelled as black on black crime. Whereas some of us knew, as a fact, that the colour of the hand that pulled the trigger was not always black. So therefore, why is it labelled as black on black crime? If a black youth was shot, it was labelled as black on black crime. It made the front page of the Manchester Evening News. But if a white youth was shot, he had a name, he had a family, and plus it never made front page. You know, because I remember somebody challenging me on that how come it doesn't make front page? I mean, the first reaction was, well, we don't write the media. It did make us think that actually, how come that if a black youth gets shot, it makes front page of Manchester Evening News, but if a white youth gets shot, it's like small tiny article like this, and it's like page 8, 9 or 10, you've actually got to look for the article. And that's where, you know, myself and some of us felt, well actually if a young person gets shot and killed, it's somebody's child. Does it really matter whether if they're black, white or Asian? It's somebody's child. And so, you know, we would think people like the media to task, that, you know, if they're going to report on these things, they need to report on them accurately. Also, one of the things we had to do was get local people to actually own the problem, because many a time local people would say, the police don't care. They don't care because it's, you know, black on black crime. Councillors don't care. People of authorities don't care. And we had heard, you know, councillors say, well, actually that part of my side here is a bit of a no-go area. You know, you kind of think, well, hang on a minute, I live there, you know, and I pay my taxes like everybody else. You know, yes, there are some people that decide to settle their scores using a deadly weapon, but not everybody does, and, you know, most of us are law-abiding citizens, so why can't we get the service that, you know, we want? You know, you dial 999, it can take about an hour before, you know, a police officer would even turn up at the end of the road, never mind actually on the there was lots of things happening like that, lots of people that felt it was not their problem. You know, it's black on black crime. I'm not black. I mean, I am, but you know, there were people that said, you know, I'm not black, so it's not my problem. You know, but you're living in the same street where the shooting happened. So as far as we were concerned, it is your problem. Just because it was a black child that got shot doesn't mean it's not your problem as well. We had many businesses, local businesses, that were not interested. They said it's not our problem, we don't live here. You know, this whole conversation about we travel in, we come in and we work and we go home. So what we were saying to them, but it's your problem as well, because you're here in our neighbourhood. And for us, this is our neighbourhood. It belongs to all of us. It doesn't belong to one set of people. And why should we wait, or why should you wait for it to be on your doorstep or right at your feet before you decide to do something about it? Because there's something that we can all do. Like I've said, one of the main things we felt we had to do was get local people to own the issue, own the problem. Because we said, you know, we kind of like turned it back around to local people and said, yeah, well, at the end of the day, some of the police don't care because it's not their children getting shot and killed. They do go home to nicer neighbourhoods, you know, quieter streets. We're the ones that are left with the aftermath. And if we don't own our own problem, that it's our children out on the streets, then who else is going to own the problem? Why should other people care? Council, we used to say they can throw as much money as they like into Moss Side. You've still got the same people living in the houses. You know, there was a time the city council, they said, oh, you know, on a certain Alexandra Park estate, they gave everybody nice, what do you call them, conservatories. We were like, you've still got the same set of people living in there. Some of them the same problem families. We're not actually getting to, you know, it's not about making the place look nicer, because people were not complaining about, whilst people were complaining about the neighbourhood, they weren't complaining about the way the neighbourhood looked. It was what was happening in our neighbourhood. And, you know, what we then realised was, well, actually, we're actually all focusing on the wrong question or the wrong issue. Yes, we had young people, like I said earlier, that were more than willing to settle their scores using a deadly weapon. There was a time, I mean, and I've had several conversations with, which I was propelled really into having these conversations like with ministers and you know, high-ranking people, which is not, it was never in my realm, and like I said, it was never my plan to do. However, I felt, well, you know what, you need a bit of reality. You know, this is real. I remember being told by a certain minister when we went down to talk to her, I remember being told, oh, well, actually, Moss Side has a problem with guns. And I was like, no, the UK has a problem with guns. And they were like, no, actually, it's Moss Side's problem. And I was like, well, actually, where is Moss Side? Is it not in the UK? So therefore, does not the UK have a problem? Why are we, yet again, you know, you're demonising, you know, a community? And at the time we knew, it's just like with the knife crime now, unfortunately, but even then with the gun crime, there were more shootings that happened in London on a weekly basis than what happened in Manchester. It's statistically been proven. And we were told, well, we were asking questions like, how come if there's a shooting that happens in Mossad, it makes local news, national news, regional news, and sometimes international news, because we've got family abroad that would even ring us, oh, we heard there was a shooting in Mossad, are you lot all right? And it's like, wow, you heard it all the way over there. But when there's shootings in London, we don't even hear about it, up north. It doesn't even come as far as, Manchester. We asked, why is that? And we were told, well, can you imagine what would happen, to our tourism if we reported on every shooting that happened? And so that's what we were saying, so you're prepared to demonise a whole community of people, for the sake of tourism. This is our neighbourhood, and the our was a lot of different kinds of people. Mossad does not only belong to black people, it's not only black people that live in Mossad. And it took us 6 years to bring gun crime to the top of the government's agenda, because the government was not interested, because yet again, it was that thing where it's not happening in our neighbourhood, it's happening in your neighbourhood, so you deal with it. But we were like, well, we could deal with it if we had the resources, to be able to deal with it. You've got the resources, it's just you're looking in the wrong direction. It wasn't about blame, because we were saying, and one thing I was saying was that we became a state or a country where we actually wait, and we still do it, we actually wait for a disaster to happen before we react and put something positive in place. It's like, for example, with the speed cameras. Speed cameras only go up when somebody's been killed in that particular spot, then they put a speed camera up. You could be telling the local council for months and years that, this is a death trap. They don't do anything when it does become a death trap. And we were saying it's the same with, with gun crime. How many young people have to die before we realise that actually we have an issue, with guns on the street. And when we went to see government ministers one time, we had facts that there was a young man that had been arrested on the streets of Mossad on Alexandra Park Estate. I think he was 14. And he'd been arrested, he had on him a Kalashnikov weapon. He was 14. Police did forensics on that weapon, which they were told not to do, but they decided to do it because there was 2 very senior officers that we worked with very closely who basically wore the heart on their sleeve, and they wanted to see the end of it, end of gun crime. They too, they did forensics, and that weapon had been used in the Bosnia War. So we were saying to the government, how does a weapon that's been used in the Bosnia War end up on the streets, of inner city Manchester, UK? But again, they'd come back, yes, but it was in Mossad. It's still in the UK. This is a country where guns are illegal, so how does that happen? How does a weapon reach from the Bosnia War to here? We said he's 14, he doesn't even know where Piccadilly train station is. No, never mind Bosnia. I don't even think he could spell Bosnia. So, these were the kind of, when I say stories, what's called case studies that we were putting to the government all the time. There's quite a few others. And like I said, it took 6 years before they started taking note, because we were putting real case studies to them. We were saying to them, one of the things we need to be doing is looking at the borders and the ports, because these weapons are being smuggled in, and they're not being smuggled in by young people. So locking away young people every single time is not going to solve the issue. Again, we were just being too quick, just lock them up, put them in prison, put them in Baltimore. And we were saying, that's not going to solve the issue, because there's still going to be another one to replace him. What we have to do is cut off the supply. If we can cut off the supply, then you cut off the demand, gun crime goes down, which is, it took, like I said, it took 6 years for the government to turn around and say, yeah, all right then, that kind of makes sense. Let's try that, looking at the borders and the ports, looking at people like your army, I said ex-army, army officials that are coming into the country, what are they bringing into the country? Even though we told, yes, but they swear under this. I said, yeah, they probably do, but they're still probably bringing stuff in, because obviously there's a market for it out there. And again, the market is not between the 14-year-olds, it's between adults. Because in my research and what I've done, I did psychology, child psychology, every single bit of unwanted behaviour that is displayed by young people, it's learnt behaviour. They learn it. And unfortunately, we as adults, that's who they learn it from. Some of us don't teach them directly, but without knowing it, we are their #1 role models. It's what we talk about, it's what we do, what we say. They actually, most often not, they go out and act what we talk about. And, you know, some of them are given weapons to go and settle their scores or just use that and frighten them, you know, but then they use it. You know, and then before you know it, one youth is dead, another youth is dead. So like I said, it did take us quite a few years to get the government to actually sit up and listen and realise that, well, actually, we do have a problem with guns. You know, and we have a problem in the fact that guns are being smuggled into this country and they're ending up on the streets. I mean, it wasn't only on the streets of Moss Side, it was South Manchester, but there was other cities as well, you know, Birmingham, London, you know, guns. When I say everywhere, I am generalising, but, you know, guns were actually getting on the streets. And we had to stop that, look for a way to stop that. Whilst the government were doing their bit, we were doing our bit, you know, going into schools, leading school assemblies, you know, talking to young people. We actually pushed to get into the schools to talk to young people. At first we were told, no, you can't come into our school, you know, our children don't know anything about gun crime. We're like, they're going back to the neighbourhoods and the streets where, unfortunately, maybe somebody's been shot, so they do know about gun crime. It's just, we were not giving young people the opportunity or the safe environment to actually talk about gun crime. You know, we were pretending as if it's one of these things that we just don't talk about, and therefore the perpetuation of, you know, of it was continuing. And when schools in particular began giving young people that safe environment to be able to talk about it, they even saw declines in their schools of young, you know, youth violence, you know, within the schools. Because we were saying, you know, when a young person, you know, like throws a chair across a room, they were never asking that child, well, actually, what's really going on, you know, with you? Instead, it was like, oh, standing outside the class, send him out or send her out. We don't want to deal with that. We haven't got the time to deal with that. Whereas we were saying, we need to be looking at the situations and the circumstances that surround our young people. Because not all of them are from, you know, happy or homes with, you know, 2.5 children and the dog, you know. Not everybody's home is like that. And again, we were not giving our young people the opportunity to talk about their home environment, to talk about the situations that they were in. And once that started to happen, because we would go into schools and lead school assemblies, and we talk openly about gun crime. You know, we'd ask young people, do they know of anyone that's been shot? You know, and if you do you know where you can report it? Do you know who you can go to in the school? And most of the time, there wasn't anybody, you know, that they could go to. And we did things like that to show the schools, like you see, they need someone to talk to. You know, some of them do have concerns about it, but there's nowhere to let it out. So it usually displays itself in anger, you know, maybe chairs or fighting, because they've got all this hemmed up emotion and they don't know what to do with it. There are people that have witnessed shootings, they've never been counselled. And again, they've got all that emotion, it sits in there. What do they do with that emotion? They've never had counselling. I know people till today, they've never had counselling. I know people that have lost their children, they've never had counselling. Nobody has ever counselled them. You know, instead, if someone gets shot, the police come in, they do what they have to do, forensic. Nobody ever gets caught. Nobody ever, but it's the family. We don't treat the family as if they've lost somebody. It was just, oh, well, there's another one. Yeah, and everybody rolls in, do what they're supposed to do, and then they move on to when the next one happens. So then you've got communities of people or neighbourhoods of people that are still today carrying that emotion, you know, that negative emotion. It's like, you know, something getting ready to explode, and most of the time it actually then displays itself through the children, you know, and the children of today are now displaying certain, you know, unwanted behaviour and emotions. I mean, now we have an epidemic with knife crime, and we did say 10 years ago that whilst we were doing all our anti-gun crime work, that we should be doing something around anti-knife crime as well. Because if you cut off the supply to guns, the next best thing is going to be knives. And we were told by our council, you know, we were told, oh, well, we don't have a problem with knife crime. And I remember saying to me, we might as well add the word yet. And this was about 10 years ago. Now we have a problem with knife crime. Just on Friday, we were in a, I don't know, conference, seminar. What are we going to do about the youth violence on our streets? We have children that are going around killing themselves with knives. You know, some of us feel like we've been here before. We were in the same position 10 years ago, you know. So yeah, you know, a lot has been done around gun crime, and we do know with the efforts of the work that we've done through our charity, working as that advocacy group, galvanising people together, networking with people, especially working with people that are different from ourselves, and working with them in a completely different way from what we normally would. We know that gun crime, I mean, it's statistically proven, gun crime has reduced by 92% in Greater Manchester as a whole, because you don't hear about the gun crime the way we used to hear about it, and that's because some of us work damn hard, to make sure, that it doesn't happen. However, we feel, which I said to one of the XTF officers, on Friday, basically we took our eye off the ball and became too complacent that, oh yeah, we've solved that issue, so let's all sit back. I've always said that the gun crime or the violent crime like that, it's like a cancer. You can solve it in one part of the area or one part of the city, but if you don't keep up with the, people would say chemo, but the preventative work constantly, it will pop up somewhere else, which is what's happening. I mean, over the years, we declared a week of peace for 10 years, and we led on that peace week for 10 years. We ran guns amnesties. I remember when we were told the first guns amnesty we wanted to do, because again, like I said, it's not really my world, but we used to have parents that would come to us and say, oh, I know my son's got a gun and I don't know what to do with it. Or grandma would come and say, I was hoovering under the bed and I saw this gun, what do I do? We were like, we don't really want them, they didn't want them, but we didn't want them, so we thought, well, you know what, we'll have a guns amnesty where everybody can come and, bring them in, and we were told, oh, you can't have a guns amnesty. We were like, why can't we have a guns amnesty? Isn't the aim to get the guns off the streets, and this is the way of getting them off the streets? And then again, it was those senior officers that said, you know what, we will get you the guns amnesty, because they thought it was a good idea. And they bent over backwards to get us, I don't know, whatever papers it was that they needed from the Home Office. But we had the first guns amnesty, I think it was about 2006, and loads of stuff was handed in to when we was like, wow, what we did it in bins, because we actually called it the Good Riddance campaign, and that's when we were told, well, actually it's guns amnesty, and I'm like, oh, okay, because we were saying people to get rid of these things, and loads of stuff was handed in. So that's one of the other things we did. We were all about changing negatives into positives, because again, Moss Side was an area in particular that was always spoke about negatively. Nothing ever nice was said about Moss Side. And anybody would think everybody in Moss Side, every third person carried a gun, the way it was talked about, everybody carried a gun. I remember one time I was being interviewed by, is it Telegraph? No, The Observer. And I thought to myself, oh yeah, I'll do that interview because The Observer's a good paper. I thought, it might be some good newspaper. And the first thing she asked me, she said, right, what's it like living in the triangle of death? And I thought, and I remember saying to her, what, this interview's over. She was like, why? I said, because I don't know where you're talking about. Oh, well, I can tell you where it is. I said, I don't want to know where it is. Because, as far as I know, I don't live there. Interview finished, and we made her leave. And this was the kind of labelling that was being done about Moss Side. Even Manchester, remember, it was also labelled as Gunchester. It wasn't Manchester, it was Gunchester. And unfortunately, we have a postcode that's M16. The M16 of Gunchester. Anything negative that they could, bring out was being drawn out. So what we started to do was play on those negatives and actually change them into positives. The local council with schools, they would give out ASBOs like big medals. You hear young people in school saying, how many ASBOs have you got? You've only got 12. Well, I've got 18, and you're thinking, hang on, it's supposed to be a bit of a deterrent. They didn't care. And they were giving ASBOs for absolutely anything and everything, So we created the OSBAs. Instead of ASBOs, we created OSBAs, Outstanding Social Behaviour Awards. So we were looking for outstanding social behaviour. And we didn't look for the goody-goody two-shoes children, because again, people always said, that they're working with young people, It was always the young people that were already converted. We were saying, you're not working with the young people that are causing the problems are not going to walk into a youth club. They're the ones out on the street. They're the ones wearing the bulletproof jackets. They're the ones, that they've got the guns in the car or the pad. We said, those are the ones that we need to be working with. Those are the ones that we need to be talking with. And people used to say, oh, they're hard to reach. I said, no, they're not. We know where they are. We just don't want to go and talk to them. I said, well, they're not that hard to reach. And so those are the young people that we engaged with, because we thought those are the ones that we need to engage with to try and understand, why do you feel the need to wear a bulletproof vest, to carry a gun? What's happening out there that, maybe we're too old, maybe we don't get it. Educate us, teach us. So we did a lot of that kind of work over the years, trying to get to understand young people, trying to get to understand why
where these things carry the weapons, trying to understand where they get them from. Trying to understand, you know, where do you get these guns from? You know, because personally, I was curious. I wanted to know, you know, how do you get hold of, you know, a gun? How? You know, because in my world, I just can't work that out, you know, and I'm quite intelligent, I would say, but I can't work that out, you know. And some of these people, like I said, they're 14 and 15, and, you know, they've got guns. Some of them were what they called Glocks, where they were imitation weapons, so we even made sure, I think they did something in Parliament and made a law against imitation weapons, who can sell them and who can't, because some people were able to get those, and in their physics class they're drilling holes into them so that they can fire actual bullets, you know. So we did lots of work over the years with lots of different agencies, basically holding people to account as well, you know, holding people account to make sure they're doing the work that they say they're doing for the communities or for the neighbourhoods, you know, making sure they're doing what they're doing. And if they weren't doing what they're doing, like I said, we was holding them to account. If we knew a certain amount of money had been put into a neighbourhood, it's not that we wanted the money, we would just say, well, what is it being used for? You said you worked with young people, which young people, from where? You know, if they say, oh, some young people are hard to reach, we'd say, well, we can tell you who they are, we can take you to where they are, so they're not hard to reach. I remember a police officer once saying to us, he was one of the senior officers, he said, the most hard to reach gang of people in Manchester are the police. You know? But yeah, I mean, I could go on and on and on. There's lots of things we've done over the past 10, 15 years which have, you know, galvanised people together and brought people together to understand that the gun crime issue that we once had was actually everybody's problem. You know, it wasn't the problem of just one set of people, and we all had to own that problem if we wanted to see a difference. And I mean, that's what we did. It took us 10, 12 years, but that is what we managed to do in the end, and we have seen the reduction in gun crime. We have seen a different way in which people actually engage and work together.
Thank you. There's an awful lot of, there's so much in that and so much to pick up on, and I'm also conscious of time because of our technical glitch. We're a bit behind, so I wondered if we could perhaps hear from Mohammed and then we could bring it together in a final conversation all at the end, if that feels okay for us to sort of hold our responses to that.
So while I'm talking, please interrupt me.
Thank you.
I've not got as much or as important thing to say as the last two speakers, so forgive me. So again, good evening everyone. My name is Mohammed and I'm the Muslim chaplain to the University of Manchester, University. To ask me what a chaplain does, that's the question I get every day. You just to talk to people and try and help them with whatever issues they may have. So I just want to say thank you to Quarantine for hosting us, and thank you for the wonderful dinner to our two chefs. We're looking forward to dessert. Tottenham scored, so I'm gutted. So I'm in a very bad mood now. I'm devastated. So let's try and I'm going to go back to maybe right at the beginning, really, where when I was first spoken to by Sarah, we talked about what does Islam have to say. I wouldn't be a good Muslim chaplain if I didn't talk about my religion. That's what I do. But I don't want it to come across as preachy, I just want to come across as more informative. So like I said, if anyone has any interjections, any questions, please do interrupt me. So neighbours, I want to talk about what is a neighbour? What do we mean by neighbour? All of us have assumed since we started talking that our neighbour is the person or the people who live next door to us. That's probably true. So I want to kind of open it up a little bit to maybe think a bit more philosophically about what it means to be a neighbour. And so when I was thinking about this, I said, well, we have our next door neighbours, we have our work. So like I work in an office, we have our work in office neighbours. We have football clubs, we have the noisy neighbours who are making a lot of noise with them. Well, not tonight. Brexit, we're evaluating who we want our neighbours to be politically, who are our neighbours and who do we want them to be. We have our political boundaries. Geographically, living in our big city of Manchester, literally on top of each other. These high-rise buildings, we are now on top of each other. But sometimes we live next door to the terrace housing, we share walls. You know, how much more neighbourly can you be than sharing a wall? So just while we've got that in our mind, I want to talk to you a little bit about what does Islam say, what does my religion teach me, or what does Islam talk about when we talk about our neighbours, and actually quite a lot, and it's very important stuff actually. So for those of you that don't know, in Islam we have 3 sources of Sharia. I'm not talking about the kind of scary Sharia that people think, chopping off hands and all that kind of stoning people. We're talking about rules that we should live by as people, no matter where we are, who we're living with, just to kind of be the best people we can be, really. So the Quran is the source of information for Muslims, is the holy book given by God to Muslims and to mankind. And then we have something called the Sunnah, which is prophetic sayings, so the things of the Prophet, things that he did. And then we have scholarly opinion. So what does the Quran say? The ultimate source. And the Quran has a beautiful verse in it, talking about neighbours actually. And the verse is, worship Allah and join none with him in worship. And do good to your parents, kinsfolk, orphans, the poor, the neighbour who is near of kin, the neighbour who is a stranger, the compassion by your side, the wayfarer, and those whom your right hand possess. Verily, Allah does not like such people who are proud and boastful. So, God commands us in the Holy Book to be good to your neighbours. And so when looking at interpreting the verse, we look at what scholars say. And one of the things that this was interpreted in saying is, when we talk about your neighbours by your side, and the neighbours who are your strangers or far away, you can interpret this in a latitude of ways, in many ways. And this is where it becomes very interesting. And the conversation that me and Sarah had about, then what does it mean to be your neighbour? If it's the one who's close to you, the one who's far from you, how far do we extend? And so we have some prophetic sayings about it. So the Prophet said, whoever believes in Allah on the last day, let him not annoy his neighbour. I love that. When I live near Muslims, I try and say, what did I say about Prophet? You're annoying me. I guess you have to have a high threshold of tolerance, I guess, and I've got me alone. Another saying, that this is a beautiful one, that we use a lot. Gabriel, who would bring the Quran to the Prophet. The Prophet said that Gabriel kept urging me so much to treat my neighbours well, until I thought that he might ask me to make them my heirs. So the importance of neighbourliness and being a good neighbour and virtuous neighbour was imparted on the Prophet so much. And so even the Prophet lived next door to his uncle when he lived in Mecca, and his uncle was a staunch disbeliever in Islam, and he had a very strong hatred towards Muhammad, peace be upon him. And so when he was praying, he would throw over the wall things on him while he was praying. And one day he shouted out to him and he said, "Oh Abu Lahab, forget the fact that I say I'm the messenger of God. Forget the fact that I'm your nephew. What about the fact that I'm your neighbour? Would you not respect me? Would you not give me the rights of a neighbour?" And so the importance of being a good neighbour has always been throughout the course of Islam. And there's one story that many Muslims will tell you, and actually evidentially I can't find much evidence for it, but it's something that is part of what Muslims talk about. It's about the Prophet would walk by a street, and there was a woman who would throw rubbish at him, and she was classed as his neighbour, and she would annoy him so much. She would annoy him, and people would always think that, he must have a harbour hatred towards her. And one day she didn't come out, and she didn't throw any, I'm not going to say no to this dessert. She didn't come out and throw rubbish on him. So he was worried about her, and he asked about her. And when he went to check up on her, she was ill. And then they were confused and said, Muhammad, would you not have enmity towards this woman who would curse you every day? He said, no, because she's my neighbour, and I must afford her the rights of my neighbour to check up on her. And so going back to the idea of a virtuous neighbour, what does it mean to be a virtuous neighbour? And so, but before then, how do we define a neighbour Islamically? Well, not clear is the answer, which means therefore it's open for interpretation. And so the most common interpretation is 40 houses to the left, the right, front of you and behind of you. But now with above you, 40 houses, left, right, behind. But again, that's or above now. It's going to be on top of you now. But I was driving to Sheffield the other day, and we were driving through the Snake Pass, and we saw houses like picturesque, beautiful areas, and the neighbours were very far. So a neighbour for them would be, how far would that extend to? And then we have this idea that, is it the locality? Is it the people who face you? The people who are facing you? Is it the people who, what about if you live in a dead end, a cul-de-sac? Do they stop there? The people who you pray with in a mosque, your tribe, all the people of the city. Someone would view that it's a custom. What does it mean customarily to have a neighbour? And so we come to this concept, which I find very interesting, of a global neighbour. We live in a global world. We're connected through so many different means. And so should that not extend to being a neighbour? And a 13th century Islamic scholar came up with an idea that the neighbour is the person who is impacted by your actions. And if we go by that definition, well, globalization, the impact we have on others as consumers, oil, the plastic we consume, war, our actions overseas, how we impact other people, they're our neighbours. Are we being neighbourly to them? Are we neighbourly to the world that we live around us, or are we constricting ourselves just to the people who we can physically see? Is it proximity, is it geography, or is it about impact? And so this led me to think about how I want to leave a message when we talk about our neighbours. And in Islam, we have rights. We call it right, having a right of a neighbour. And some of those rights include helping them if they ask for help, giving them relief if they seek your relief, lending him money if she or he needs a loan, not blocking his air by raising your building high without his permission. That's interesting, isn't it? Not blocking your air before we're doing that to each other. Not to harass him. I should put these on my wall outside. Give him a share when you buy fruits, or when you go to shopping, give them some. Do not be jealous of them when they take out their children. Oh, that's not. I'm going to ignore that one. Visit them when they are ill. Attending their funerals, and if they commit sin, you prevent other people from knowing it. Congratulate them if they have goodness. And so, the message I wanted to leave was, so we can discuss it more, is Islam does put a huge emphasis on the rights of your neighbour. Whoever that is, whatever definition you want to use, if you want to take it to the person immediately to the left or right of you, and that's the most narrow definition, or if you want to give the most wide definition, which is everyone who's affected by actions, and that's a lot of people, considering what we use, what we consume, how we travel through areas and how we pass. Do we litter? Do we throw rubbish in an area because it's not our area? Do we see that as they're not being our neighbours? But either way, it is clear that you must treat them with diligence, kindness, love, and compassion. But why should we? Well, again, using the narrowest definition or the widest, because if we even start with our nearest neighbour and we treat them with goodness and kindness and virtuousness, is that a word? And my mind's in a physical city I've lost. Devastating. Because that has a ripple effect. Because if they then treat their neighbour as they're supposed to treat them, and if we all do our little bit and we don't feel this massive need to have to change the world, then that's fine, because then it means that everyone is doing their little part, and that ripple effect can impact the world. But even if it means that you feel like the people who are overseas are your neighbours, because you're impacting them, then you can still have a virtuous action towards them through other ways. And so I want us to think a bit more about how we think about our neighbours, and who our neighbours are, and how we're impacting on them every single day, and how we as individuals can change ourselves to maybe be better neighbours. Thank you.
Thanks, Mohammed. You can eat your dessert now.
Any questions or anything to say? Just go for it.
What's the score now?
I'll go for the final
1-0, I think. I think it's over.
95 minutes.
1-0.
I just want to know what I'm going home to.
I was kind of, I was trying to write things down as you were all talking, like just thinking about what the things are, the threads that have been running through, and there's something interesting that sort of, a question that sort of appeared for me between these two and then what Mike said at the beginning, and a lot of the conversations that went on after Mike's provocation was like sort of a question about whether neighbourliness is always driven by self-interest, or whether it is more driven by a compassion or an awareness of other people, and I don't know if those two things can be separated. And then a sort of a question about what compels us to act. Like, you've been compelled to act, to do something, and I'm interested in that in both senses of the neighbour that you mentioned. So what compels us to act for the person next door to share our shopping, or to allow their children to play noisily on a Sunday morning? And then in a broader sense, what compels us to act? What we were talking today about, like, shall we stop buying fizzy water? Like, what compels us to act for the impact of other people? Yeah, and I'll throw it back open to all of you for another half an hour or so.
I really enjoyed from both of you this connection to the global perspective, and how smaller actions can have these ripple effects, and you know, I really can see this perspective around care, and that you know, we can think about how we care about things, and that we can choose not to act, and we can make choices. And I think it's fantastic that you made a choice to do something. You made a choice to do something and to bring people together, especially for someone who's teaching young people, myself, teenagers and young adults. I really take from this the leadership that you're offering, which I think is really crucial, and that we have to kind of foster. It's something that has to be fostered, and it is something that can be taught, and that young people they're picking up things from us. So I was kind of questioning in my own classroom, actually, what is it about my young people that they don't talk? What am I doing that's not enabling them to talk? And how do I create an environment in which we can somehow talk? And that takes such a long time to build that trust, to get someone to speak, or to have a connection with you that they would want to say something in front of other people. And so I'm really excited actually to have this conversation about the environments that we create, or the environments that we fail to create by our action or inaction. So you just thank you for that perspective.
Yes, I was about to say something very similar and very powerful, from both of you in different ways, very powerful responses to ideas about neighbourliness, with this notion that, particularly when you're talking, Erinma, about this idea of starting with an incredibly challenging situation and a negative, and out of it growing something that feels, I know it's not perfect, and I know that not everything has changed, and that it's not everything in the garden is rosy, but such a positive shift. But there's clearly a relationship between effort and hard work and making that shift happen. I think sometimes we get, well, I feel, I said earlier what kind of neighbour I am. I think I am a passive neighbour. I think I've discovered in my life that I have some skills, some experience, some context through the work that I do, that I can do things that, in a sense that Mohammed was talking about, are perhaps somehow neighbourly. And I think maybe for each of us, we find our own ways, don't we? We find our own context and our own ways of operating within the world that might do something about neighbourliness. It's nice to be reminded that we each have the capacity and the power to do it, but that it's going to be working on.
Yeah. And I think it's also about finding, which I think it's been said, but finding ways, which is what we have to do, find ways in which people are connected to what the issue is. And we found that people were connected to it in different formats, in different forms, but they did have a connection. So for example, when we were speaking to the corporate companies who sponsored our hospital awards, we made them sponsor everything. That's why I knew what corporate social responsibility was. I was like, but it was about saying to them things like, well actually, your organisation or your big nice flashy building is in the middle of Hume on my side,
And your workers, yes, they do have, they may travel in and travel out, but something could happen when they step out the, when they step out the office block. Not that we're wishing that on anybody, but that could happen. So are you going to wait for that to happen before you engage with us, or are you going to work with us to, enable our work to go into schools and talk to young people so that it doesn't happen? So I think when you give people that connection, that, well, actually you are connected to this. You might not live in the area, but you work in the area, or your employees work in the area. That's when people start to see things differently. That, oh yeah, maybe we should do something about this as well. It's not just their problem, because that's what people were saying at the moment. Really, in the main, it was a Moss Side problem. So it's only for the problem of the people that lived in Moss Side. We saw it totally different. It was everybody's problem, but we had to voice that, and we have to visually show people that this is also your problem.
Do you have any sense, we were talking earlier after Mike spoke about this or that rapidly changing city, this really incredibly fast growing city, the city centre, and a lot of apparently very visible affluence. It seems to me that we're presenting images of what it means to be successful, or we're presenting images of the world. Do you have any sense of what that is? That doing anything to the area that we live
in? Well, not particularly, because again, we refuted this. Many of us that lived in the area of Moss Side. People used to say, oh, Moss Side is a very deprived area. Moss Side, Yes, I must admit, at the time of the shootings, Alexandra Park Estate, nobody wanted to live there, because the little runs were like, with cars. But that's all changed now. I mean, Alexandra Park Estate has something like a 200 plus waiting list, for people who want to live there. House prices have really gone up to where a house, typically a house in Moss Side is selling for almost 180,000, 200,000, pounds. And so the houses are not cheap, in Moss Side. I wouldn't say it's an over-affluent area, but it's not a deprived area. Most people of Moss Side would tell you it is not a deprived area. If somebody, was buying a house and, like a young couple, like, I've got loads of them in my house, but I don't want them to come home, but, who are looking to buy, like their first house, and, they even know that, if I've got £300,000, or I can loan up to £300,000, instead of coming to the city centre to buy an apartment where I'm up in the sky, I'd rather have a house, with my own front door, where I've got my driveway, and because I can easily get that, probably for either the same money, or for the same amount of money, you can get a lot more for your money. And I think that's how people see it. There's and people do move about. People do buy and sell and still move on to bigger houses or better houses, or there are quite a lot of people I know, we're kind of like stuck in that bracket where our house is worth quite a lot, because it's our family house, it's a 6-bedroom Victorian house, so it is worth quite a lot. But then if we were to move, you want to move to something bigger, but we can't afford something that you're talking way over $1 million. And do we want to spend £1 million on a house? Not really. Do we want to be living in the middle of a field, where your next neighbour is not 40 houses away, probably 40 miles away? No, not really. So, we'd rather, stay put where we are. So, I don't think people see that house prices are going up, but I don't think they necessarily see that it's out of their reach. Probably what it is they don't have the social education and know how to get onto that, the ownership housing ladder, that it's better to own than rent. Some people feel, well, no, I'd rather rent, because then, like you were saying, the people that live there for 9 months, that they don't like the house, they can easily move on and rent somewhere else, which is like what one of my sons does in Leeds. He moves into a house, if he doesn't like it, he says, oh, I'll just leave, then he goes and rents somewhere else. And we're saying, no, you should buy it, stay put. But, he feels he wants to move about, he's not ready yet to stay in one place. So.
These are the bigger generational changes, aren't they? The more recent changes, and it's like access to finance is like it's a macroeconomic thing. It's not, and that's what this whole burgeoning of private rented sector, and when we say young, when I refer to young people, I mean that age group, 22 to 35. Being young is stretching now. But all of that comes out of those big macro things. It's not like some individual choice. Do you know what I mean? And there's always an interplay, like each generation makes their choices within constraints of all sorts. My generation was the first, the whole Thatcher thing about everyone will own property, property owning, democracy and all the rest of it. The generation immediately before that, I wouldn't, most working class people or even lower middle class people would never dream of buying. It's not that long ago. It's a relatively recent phenomena to expect to buy. So I find it quite interesting, like, isn't it terrible young people can't get a mortgage? I'm thinking, well, it was only a relatively short period of time when that was even an expectation, really, for most people. So I think the history thing interests me, the kind of... I think we sometimes have short memories around really what it was like.
Although the difference there was that there was affordable housing, there was social housing for people who couldn't afford private rent.
In the 60s and 70s, there wasn't before that. So there was a huge private rented...
It was a feudal system.
So it goes over... each generation goes over different developments that are happening. And I suppose I'm getting tired now. I'm getting tired. What I'm trying to say is there are various constraints within each generation, aren't there? And I'm a firm believer that there actually has been progress in spite of the problems that we're dealing with now. We deal with a different set of problems. But I don't think it's all negative and all bad.
Not at all.
No. And I think it's...
Well, I think they come from the same root in a way. So the global perspectives that Nick brought to the table around language and actually around race and identity in Britain, Britain is a super diverse place, and it's changing so quickly. English is not going to be the majority spoken language for much longer. And I think these are the kind of things that we don't talk about. I think it's really interesting that you brought up about language and the newspapers and the way that the media could put a spotlight on a particular community, and that would shape the perceptions around the country. And that's to do with race. And these are the kinds of things on a global level that we have to kind of come and get to grips with in thinking about who's included, who's excluded. I don't think those things have really surfaced.
Did anybody watch that TV series on Redcar? Did you watch?
I screened that film at Sheffield Doc Fest.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah? I loved that. I thought that was really interesting piece of TV and about that community. If you didn't see it, then there's no point having the conversation.
But these things are linked. Because race and class are the same, two sides of the same coin. They're produced by the same thing. Globalised industry has produced the challenges around class. And
but I don't normally cry in documentaries at all. It's like but there were moments in that when it was the camera in people's families and the decisions being taken. It was GCSE results day. It just got me, and all of those kids, their only personal plan was to get out of that place. There was nothing there for them, and they were like, "Oh, I'm going to go to Manchester," and it's like, it was really touching. I thought, because I thought it might have been exploitative. Sometimes these fly on the wall documentaries can be. But I thought that was a touching piece of TV. Anyway, interesting.
Can I say something about, and this is to both of the wonderful talks about local and global here. So both of you saying it's not necessarily a particular Moss Side problem, it's a UK problem, and we've got Neighbourliness, which is local, and Neighbourliness is everyone who's affected by it. Do you think there would be much lost if we just went and focused on the global and the bigger picture? I mean, is Neighbourliness the kind of thing that if we lost it at the local level, there would be, given changes, there would be that greater loss if we regard everyone as a kind of citizen who we should
I think now local is global, isn't it? These things we do on this part of the world that affects people on the other part of the world, and that's a fact. And I think going you know, going off what my namesake said here, it sounds you know, with the way things have changed, and the way societies have changed, and the way the look of the societies have changed, you know, the multiculturalism that we have now. I think we need to, you know, recognise that, you know, I think me and you were talking this earlier, you know, about basic colonialism. You know, what colonialism did then is not being taught now. What colonialism was, what it did, why it happened. That part of history, if you want to call it history, is not taught. So therefore, there's kind of like a gap as to why are we now so global? You know, why do we have multicultural Britain, apart from stupid Brexit? But you know, there's a bit that's missing, and I think, you know, that needs to come into play, and that needs to be taught to people so that we know about that, because then the whole reason why, you know, we're even so diverse around this table, it then starts to make sense to people. It then starts to make sense as to who your neighbour is, and just, you know, because, and I am generalising here, because your neighbour looks different from you, you know, maybe, you know, race-wise, doesn't mean they're not your neighbour, because, you know, a lot of us, we want a scenario, you know, we go on holiday, you know, we travel abroad, and then they become our neighbours. You know, even though we're in another country, those people become our neighbours because we're living with them side by side for a period of time, whether if it's 1 week, 2 weeks, 6 weeks, or whatever. You know, they become our neighbours. You know, so I think this neighbourly thing, even though we say, you know, it's local, that local can actually also be global, and we learn so much from our global citizens that are, you know, all around us. I mean, I'm a DL, so, you know, I do lots of citizenship ceremonies, and I actually say to people, you know, when they're coming in, that yes, you've become British citizens, but it doesn't mean you lose your original identity as to where it is you're coming from. You're actually bringing a wealth of knowledge, wisdom and understanding, you know, to those of us who reside here, and we hope to engage with that. You know, everybody wants to engage with that. You know, you will learn from us, we will learn from you. It's not something that they park, you know, one side because I'm now British. You know, they don't park it one side. And I also encourage them that no, they shouldn't. You know, no, they shouldn't. I describe myself as a Nigerian born in Britain, because that's what I am. If I was born in China, it wouldn't make me Chinese. I'd still be a Nigerian born in China. You know, and I think we need to embrace more of those kind of conversations and more of that understanding that is, I think globally, that is how we are. You know, and I think the local is now global, and so I think you can keep anything as local.
When you were talking though before, there was something there about connection though, and I think that's a, you know, like you were saying about the gun crime, you need to find ways to connect people to the issue, and isn't that one of our big struggles, if you like, is to just make sure that people do find the connection.
Well, in that, you said something earlier about, when you were speaking, Professor, about how you have to learn to be a neighbour, you learn. So I don't think we can stop doing what we say do locally. It's impossible, because we have to, I mean, I'm a firm believer that if you start with your local, then you can make bigger change. However, we have to be aware of what Erinma is saying, is that we are living in a global world. We have, it is, everything's around us now. And so I think we have to learn how to be better global neighbours as well, and that's much harder to do, because that impacts our life probably a lot more than the person next to you, because I might spend 10, 11, 12 hours out of my house, and by the time I go back home, like my next neighbours are asleep, I go to sleep, I'm not really impacting them. What I do have to think about is my choices I make. How, as a consumer, do I choose a company that's exploiting people overseas and trying to pretend that doesn't happen, buying from places in clothing factories or bottled water where I know that it's having a massive detrimental impact on the people that it's coming from? Or do I make the right choices? And that's harder for us to do because we can't see it. It's not around us. I'm not seeing I'm not connecting to them. I don't see the impact that it has on the pollution, the waste, or the drama that it brings, the wars that we go to, and oil that is consumed overseas. I'm not seeing it. It's hidden from me. Whereas if it was next to me, I could see the impact, and my choices might be more different. So we have to do the local thing. We have to be good neighbours to each other. We have to say the hello. We have to be the polite. We have to follow social convention. We have to park in our correct spaces. When you park outside the house, you have to take your bin and not steal your next door neighbour's bin. You put the rubbish in the bin, not on the floor, hoping that someone's going to take it. You have to do those things. Otherwise, we'll go mad. Because then our day-to-day will just drive us insane. And then we take it to a bigger level. Well, actually, how is it affecting us globally? How are our choices affecting the world around us? In that they are our neighbours. So that's what I would say to that. It has to be a dual thing.
Yeah, it's a dual thing.
I think there's something interesting that keeps coming up around sort of like how neighbourliness, how it changes when money becomes part of the picture. So when it's about profit, how neighbourliness changes, or when it's about tourism and wanting to paint a particular image of a place. So yeah, I don't know what the question is. I just thought it was interesting, like in relation to global, because obviously then you're dealing with an awful lot of different people's interests when you're trying to make your neighbourly choices, which is complicated. And then that sort of brings it back to like a sort of the question again about, well, how do we live together? It sort of takes us back to where you started about, what did you call it, Mike? Like rational self-interest. Like it brings us back to that thing. Well, how do we can't remember what word you used, but how do you find those paths where you can live together without it then becoming a war about who's doing this?
And usually when it is the impact, so we talked before about all these high-rise buildings, and you said that the developer had £80 million through the thing and said, well, I want to build this high-rise building because it makes me a profit. The fact that it could impact all the people around it, we don't have really a say. Do you know why? Because we haven't got the money to buy that now.
But they've also created 600 homes.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's the thing. So
yeah, but those people are people
they might,
the community.
yeah, but that, remember that high-rise now, if I have a house, that might be impacting my view, my space, how I then work around that area.
It was derelict docks.
But you're playing, obviously, but it's the question of money.
Yeah.
It's about finance. The question is money does have a massive impact.
Of course.
When money's involved, you don't have a say. The people with the money have the say on how what your neighbourhood looks like, and that's why it comes down to this. So you're right, financially it makes a massive impact.
But I guess it's not always, well, is it or is it not always about money? So I'm thinking about your actions in Moss Side, which weren't, like, you made a massive change there that wasn't about money and wasn't about profit. So, like, it's not like money's the only way that something changes either.
It has a massive impact on it.
Yeah, of course.
It can.
So, what struck me when you were talking there really was taken with some of the things that you were saying. Whilst I'm not sure what time you're going to end up, it's kind of it's like massive subjects that came into my head, because we don't in terms of being neighbours or dealing with the bins or how kind we are to each other, empathy, it's not all in a vacuum. There's a big context to this. There's always a context, isn't there? And that was one of the things I think is a problem, and I do worry about, which is currently the curriculum and education around history and around religion. So, I mean, these are massive subjects to end the evening on. But I do think that there's a lot of discussion and conversation about these sorts of issues, which sometimes appear to be in a complete vacuum of understanding about what real history has been and how we've got here. And it worries me when I see like my kids' curriculum on history and I go, really? You know, they know, like, you take a 15-year-old now, they know nothing, you know. Even the ones who have been to really good schools, what they're actually being taught, I find a real problem in terms of history, and also the massive changes about the fact that we have not. I was brought up with stories from the Bible, but I was not brought up in a religion, if you know what I mean. So, it's funny now, I'm older, I think there's a real problem if there's a generation of kids who just don't even know what Bible stories are or any religion stories. You know, so you can have a reference. It struck me, there was a reference to Moses, and somebody's, who's Moses? And I was like, oh God, where do I start? You know, so there's no like religious, historic grounding.
There's people who say don't bring religion into Easter.
Yeah. Let's just have it on the same date every year, just so. Yeah, but I'm not driven by a religion or a faith, or it's not. But as I've got older, I do think it's a real problem.
Schools do teach a lot about comparative religions, though. Maybe not in great depth.
Yeah,
but they do have that in.
My 18-year-old knows no Bible stories. He does not know, but he has no.
No, unless you've been to a CAV school or something, you're not.
I mean, he's been to a good school and
Bible
he's been
stories.
to Parswood in South Manchester, which is a great big, you know.
I was thinking in the context of neighbourliness. I was thinking about the story of the Good Samaritan.
Yeah, exactly.
So
there you go.
It's a very powerful story, but yeah, lots of people.
Well, you could.
I do think it's. Is it not down to parents to teach their children about religion? Should the state be doing that?
I'm not somebody who argues that schools ought to do my job for them.
No.
I mean, I do go into Friars Primary School just down the road, and I do stuff with that. I mean, and they have Muslims who go in, Muslim.
But each of those religions has those kind of symbolic stories, parables, and all that.
It's the ethics of religion. And it's about behaviour. And I was brought up in a Church of England family. I went to church. I'm not a church girl. He is my local church, but I'm a parishioner, not a member of the congregation.
Yeah.
But you get taught, in a basic way, what's right and wrong, and that's an important thing. And it's in every religion. There's a right and wrong, and the parables or the different stories of different religions actually coincide a lot. So, in a way, it can come from lots of areas.
I think that one of the challenges of contemporary society is that for many of us, and again, not having a religious faith, but growing up in the 1960s in a family that did, I don't feel like culturally we've found a secular replacement for the activity of gathering together in churches or whatever.
I think it's also the
science.
When talking about information, it's interesting you talk about the information about what you're taught at school, because I don't, or family. But I don't think that's the only way we get information anymore. No. Every single one of us has these. Information is more readily available than it ever was before. Not all of it accurate, if it's the media have anything to say with it, but we have information there. And so when I was younger, what the curriculum was and what you were taught in school was the basis of what your understanding of history, etc. was, and then maybe a few documentaries and maybe your family. But it's not like that anymore. We have information at our fingertips. We have videos, you have YouTube, you have social media. It's very different now. You can now see riots taking place. When the revolution happened in Egypt, it was all streamed online. You could see it. You were there. We were there. It wasn't just it wasn't over there. It was there. It was in front of our eyes.
You can access so much. You're right. There's so much in there to access that. But my son's never going to search for Bible stories. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, we know the answers are in there, but it's a social and cultural context. That's what it's the context.
Does it relate to a concept that we haven't really tackled, but I'd be interested to know what people think and how it sits next to neighbourliness, is the idea of good citizenship. So what's the difference, or is there one? To what extent do they overlap between neighbourliness as a virtue and good citizenship?
They do actually teach that in schools.
Yeah.
Citizenship
Yes,
is amazing. Whether it goes in or not, I don't know. It's a bizarre concept.
They have to teach British values as well, which is complete nonsense, because they're not British values, they're just
values.
But
human rights.
A lot of the British values are about neighbourliness, aren't they? Are they?
What would be the philosophical take on citizenship versus neighbourliness?
I think citizenship might be more encapsulated in a set of rules and regulations and less to do with emotional idea. If you want to be a good citizen, here's how you do it, here are the norms, and I think it's more easily teachable and less easily less to do with personal connections.
I mean, when I was I went to college in Nigeria. It's more like a finishing school, but anyway.
You enjoyed it.
That was a right song, but and the thing is, I think because again in Nigeria, you have all the different, we have our three main tribes, but you've got, the country's actually split 50-50 more or less, Christians and Muslims. But we had a lesson called general ethics. So they didn't teach any particular religion. They didn't focus on any particular, you know, even though the people that taught us were actually nuns. But anyway, we had a lesson called general ethics, which when I look back all these years, I think was actually very good.
Yeah.
And it you know, because it didn't sway to either or. It taught you just about being, you know, neighbourly, whatever that word is, being a good citizen, you know, the virtues of good and bad and how you behaved, you know, maybe as a female and as a male or towards each other. And it was, you know, it was actually very well received. And when I look back, I think, you know, we should have lessons like that, just general ethics. You know, what are general ethics and not of a particular persuasion. And I think, you know, that would work. You know, and then I also think, I've always said this, I'm an academic, but I've always said this, that schools basically, you know, teach our children the academic ability to pass exams. Life skills come from us, you know, parents. That's where they get the life skills. They're not going to get life skills from school unless you have a particular teacher, you know, who's that way inclined. But otherwise, technical ability to pass exams, they, you know, they can teach that all day. And if young people get the formula, you know, they will get the A's and the A stars and the A school. Some of them can get your A stars and come out and like, so they still don't know nothing. You know, don't know much about life. You know.
So I wonder if there's kind of different kind of knowledge or responses that people need to get access to. Whether it's like, I was really interested to, you know, I don't know anything about the Quran, but I was really enjoyed hearing a story from it that I can think, oh, this is another way to think about things. And I think there's the, you know, what other stories that we can tune into, but also come with the idea that we can ask questions. And for me, I try and foster my students that they're thinking for themselves and asking questions. Sometimes that gets them into trouble, but to ask questions, I think, and to critique things is really crucial. So yeah, I think this idea of how you embed ethics in as an ethos, but also as a way of teaching. And I wondered kind of about how do we expand beyond ourselves as humans, because we're very much focused on us as human neighbours. What about, could we extend citizenship to other species and other life? Because our own life depends on it, and that's kind of what's coming back to us right now. So how could I extend, you know, me thinking about my allotment or food that I eat to other species and other plants, and their kind of intelligence. So a kind of more than human perspective. Does that shift us away from just thinking about what we want to get from other people and what they get from us? So I was wondering about, you know, maybe there's something about the garden here, and kind of I saw there's a bird tray in the garden, and I've been hoping to see birds, and you know, seasons have changed by climate change. We've really changed what species are out there. Is there another way to kind of think about this that extends it beyond just humans?
An environment, a sense of community. If it's supposed to promote communal well-being, then we have an extended sense of community.
Environment, and turning it from turning to your environment. Your environment encompasses everything, then, doesn't it? It encompasses the climate, encompasses how we impact the climate through our usage of things and cars and driving, and then it also talks about the animals that are in that, because they're part of our environment. We talked about pets a lot before. You know, but just because they're not cuddly and cute doesn't mean they're not part of our ecosystem. And so yes, it would extend to your environment. Being a neighbour means being the best to your environment. That's what we say, to your environment. And usually we just think of that as human beings. And unfortunately, while I was thinking and writing this, it always usually why you have to be a good person or a good neighbour usually is when it impacts you. So and I'm going to come back to it. It's people can park in my space all the time, but unless I park in theirs, they don't understand the impact now. Now it's not impacting them. If I need sugar in the middle of the night and I can't knock on my neighbour's door, it's only when they need it they realise, oh, I wish I had a relationship with my neighbour to get that sugar. So it's only when something impacts us and our bin is stolen or something happens to us that we decide actually maybe, and we need to reach out to the people around us. And so maybe we should preempt that by just trying to be virtuous and good and neighbourly, because we never know when we might be that neighbour in need. And that also includes globally. You know, all these things that are happening in the world, all this conflict, all this kind of global impact, and global warming is one of them. we're seeing floods in certain countries and tsunamis everywhere, but because it's not on our shores, when it usually will happen, but we'll make the biggest fuss when it happens to us. And it usually, unfortunately, is when something negative happens to us, or someone annoys us, or someone takes our rights away from us, when we really think, actually, wait a second, have I given my rights to them? I'm worried about people taking mine, but am I extending that to other people? Am I giving that neighbours? Am I being the virtuous, good neighbour? Why do I expect them? Love for your brother what you love for yourself. Do unto others what you want to do unto yourself. These are all religious virtues, and it's all about being good to someone else, so that if it ever came to it, they would act like that towards you.
In some places, rivers have rights, which has been a way to sort of preserve land. So that could be something to think about in the future. I mean, we've thought about rights and citizenship of robots, but what if rivers had rights?
And usually they do say in some places, you know, the river, you know, has been pushed back, you know, to create land for them to build on. But what has always happened is the river has come back to claim the land. That's the right to be there.
I'm just wondering whether there's something. You mentioned about Bible stories, but I think there's something about stories in general that actually neighbourliness is about story, I think, rather than rule. So citizenship is about, it's about rules, perhaps. I mean, probably citizenship has some element of story about it, but it's about sharing in other people's stories, I think, and sharing our stories. And we're a very diverse country. You mentioned about the diversity, but it's about building new stories that we all sharing. I mean, my daft examples of neighbourliness around us with the car crash outside the house, it becomes a story, and it becomes a story in which we share. And I think we need to build stories that we share together.
I'm just gonna do this to to posit, because I'm conscious of time, and that feels like a nice place to sort of wrap up this bit of the discussion. We've got about 15 minutes until we said that we would end, and Kate can take our headphones off. And just as a final thing, what we'd like you to invite you to do is just, we won't go in a circle, people can just go try, people can just put them in, but just a final thought or perhaps action that you will carry with you or take away from this conversation or want to leave in the air. And I can kick us off. So I think I was just thinking there from the last bit, and it needs to be quite short because we've got 15 minutes and there's 15 of us. But I was just thinking from that last bit there that something I would like to do as a result of this conversation is maybe be a bit more conscious of the stories that I regularly consume and how I might be able to access other stories. So that's my thought.
I think probably what I would like to say to people is dare to step outside of your comfort zone, because I think too many of the time we stay within what we're comfortable with, talk to who we're comfortable with, mix with who we're comfortable with. I think if we dare to step outside of that, then we broaden our own relationships, with other people, broaden our own understanding of people, even the stories, what we may hear, will even broaden those stories. So I think what people should always do, because like I said, a lot of our work in the past has been about connecting and engaging with people that are completely different from ourselves and working with them and connecting with them in a completely different way. And I think if people would dare to do that more so, we'd get more connectivity, or you'd get more connectivity. So dare to step outside of your comfort zone.
I love the idea that your neighbour is someone who you affect, and it's that simple and that massive. I think that's such a really interesting idea. Think a lot more about that.
And on that, I would say, reiterate what I said before about, I think we all should go away thinking about how every single one of our actions does. If it's good or bad, how it impacts other people, and that is about being a neighbour. I think that's a very good definition of a neighbour, because then everyone essentially is someone who you impact. And then an action for all of us, maybe we can all go away and do something nice for our neighbours. Maybe let's think about, even if they respond, whether they respond or not, whether they give us that weird, creepy look or not, what the hell are you doing? We can all maybe smile, even if it's just a smile, the next time we see them, if it's just a hello, or a box of chocolates or something, because that will make us feel good about ourselves. So it's very selfish to do that. And you don't know the impact it might have. You don't know the impact you have on each other. So think about the impact and maybe do something tomorrow or the day after to try and impact someone the day.
I agree. I think we're all so busy rushing around doing whatever we're doing every day. You don't have time to really think about what impact you're having on other people. And however many people you come into contact with, whether it's a whole class if you're a teacher, so 30 kids every day, or just half a dozen people, you're having some kind of impact that you're not maybe aware of.
I like the idea of the neighbours being 40 houses to one side and 40 different. Yeah, but I think, and that's probably thought that's in thinking of a smaller scale. I think you've got to big that up and think, you know, that's extending right across the city almost, and maybe be thinking that we're all neighbours.
I'm thinking that I've enjoyed being part of this conversation with a disparate group of people, and one of the things that we have talked about at Sacred Trinity is that we want to encourage conversation, and maybe I'll try and think about whether there's ways we can, you know, do conversation between neighbours in a, you know,
I'll sign up.
Yeah, in a non-preachy sort of way. It's not about being preachy or anything. It's about just, being good neighbours.
I think the point that actually stuck with me a little bit, something you said, and it was almost in passing, kind of relates to that, is looking at maybe where people aren't part actively of a neighbourhood or feeling neighbourly, and it's not just your responsive behaviour way towards them, but when you mentioned thinking about how whatever the issue is for you, how they're connected to that, being able to articulate to them how this affects them, why they should be invested, why they might want to take more of an active role, which in your instance was describing quite a really significant issue, but could apply in all sorts of ways for us to start to make those connections with people around us that maybe aren't so forthcoming for whatever reason in buying into neighbourliness.
I was thinking about again diversity of experience around the table, and knowing that I have no idea how to plan a town or architect a building or profess in philosophy or speak about Islam or be a scientist or whatever. But I think one of the things that my mind's been settling on or revolving around during the discussion is this idea of the commons of common spaces, common places. I think it maybe is within my capacity to think about ways of inventing and developing common spaces and places, and that feels like an interesting thing to do.
Is it just me?
It's you and Rennie, I think. You don't have to if you don't want to. But
it's too much to process.
I think I've probably picked up that it's okay, and I've learnt this very recently. I think it's okay to not be neighbourly sometimes, because it's not a thing to do all of the time, and sometimes it might be that you need other people to do it to you, but you're not in a position to give back, and your home's your home, and it's your private home, and you don't necessarily need to have people in your home. So for me personally, I can see that there's a way to be responsive to this thing of what neighbourliness is. Sometimes it could be intrusive for some people, and sometimes, if they're from a different class or from a different religion or a different creed, there's differences, there's nuances, and it takes time to kind of figure those things out. So I think that I'm kind of okay with my neighbours. I live in a very diverse area. We don't really go into one another's houses, but there is a nice thing that happens on the street where people acknowledge one another, and that's kind of enough. They take one of the parcels. If by accident you've left your phone, they'll lend, you know, those things happen, and so that tells me that I'm living in a good place. So I think I can't do more at the moment. So I think I'm good with where I am with my neighbourliness. But I think the thing I can do is to bring more diverse stories into my classroom, and to kind of make sure that I'm always bringing that in to give different perspectives to my students.
I really wanted to tell you the story about when my neighbour stole my cat. But there isn't
That's
time.
a bit negative.
It's okay, she moved. The neighbour. Yes.
There's lots of stolen cat stories.
Yeah. She was doing it for the good of the cat, apparently. Anyway, I don't know why that came into my head, but there were just so many serious points that I really, that I work with and think about to some different degrees. The conversation tonight will stay with me for quite a while. So it's the impact of this, in how we think about it. It's really useful.
Can I just say thank you?
Thank
It's been
you.
amazing food, amazing company.
Yes.
And really,
It
really
was wonderful.
interesting.
Honestly, thank you, Charlie. Amazing. It was wonderful. That's
I think we
all.
should give them